to the Unveiled Epic Echoes channel. Today, we're diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery as the sun dips low over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the vast, empty stretches of Colorado's forgotten highways, where the wind whispers secrets from a time long before the first settlers laid their tracks upon the earth. And in the quiet hush of twilight, when the world seems to hold its breath, drivers on a particular desolate road known only to locals as the Silent Highway report glimpses of a spectral figure gliding effortlessly beside their vehicles, never quite touching the ground, a phantom whose presence stirs the soul with an inexplicable mix of wonder and unease, drawing us back to the hidden layers of history buried beneath the asphalt and the dust. This road, winding through the high plains near the mountains, wasn't always a path for modern travelers. Centuries ago, it traced the ancient migration routes of the Ute people, who spoke in hushed tones of spirits that walked the earth without leaving footprints, guardians of forgotten truths from an era when the land was alive with the echoes of civilizations that predated even the great pueblos of the ancestral. And it is here, in this seamless tapestry of time, that our story unfolds through the eyes of Elias, a weary archaeologist from Denver, whose life had been spent unearthing pottery shards and petroglyphs from the arid canyons, always chasing the elusive thread of America's untold past. A man whose skepticism was as rugged as the terrain he traversed, yet whose heart yearned for the discovery that would rewrite the narratives etched in dusty textbooks. Elias had heard the rumors during a late-night stop at a roadside diner inn, where grizzled truckers nursed black coffee and shared tales of a translucent woman in flowing robes that shimmered like moonlight on water, packing cars at impossible speeds without a sound, her feet hovering inches above the gravel. And though he dismissed it as folklore born of isolation and fatigue, something in their eyes, the quiet conviction, the unspoken fear, planted a seed of curiosity that grew as he drove north under a canopy of stars. The highway unspooling like a ribbon through the darkness, the only company the hum of his old Jeep's engine, and the distant howl of coyotes calling across the plains. As the miles blurred, Elias' mind wandered to the historical fragments he'd pieced together over years of digs. The mysterious disappearance of an entire Ute village in the 1500s, recorded vaguely in Spanish conquistador journals as a place where the people vanished into the air, leaving no trace but whispers on the wind, and whispers of even older inhabitants, perhaps migrants from the lost Clovis culture or enigmatic visitors from across the Burying Land Bridge, who left behind enigmatic stone carvings depicting figures defying gravity, symbols that modern scholars attributed to shamanic visions. but which Elias suspected hid deeper, forgotten technologies or spiritual rites tied to the Earth's magnetic fields, anomalies that could explain levitation or ethereal apparitions in ways science had yet to grasp. The night deepened, the air growing crisp with the scent of sagebrush and pine, and Elias felt a subtle shift, as if the road itself was alive, pulsing with an ancient rhythm. When suddenly, in his peripheral vision, she appeared not hitchhiking in the traditional sense, thumb outstretched, but matching his pace effortlessly, her form gliding parallel to the jeep, her bare feet suspended above the cracked pavement, her long hair trailing like mist, and her eyes, oh those eyes, locked on his with a gaze that pierced through the glass and into his very core, conveying not malice, but a profound sadness, a plea from across the veil of time. He slowed the vehicle, heart pounding in a mix of scientific intrigue and primal instinct. But she neither faltered nor approached, simply maintaining her ethereal stride, her robes fluttering without wind, embroidered with patterns that resembled the petroglyphs he'd studied, spirals and floating humanoids, symbols of ascension from native lore, perhaps linked to the ancient Hopi tailies of Kachinas who walked between worlds, or even older, to the Fremont people's rock art depicting beings that hovered in the sky, hidden stories suppressed by colonial historians who favored tidy narratives over the chaotic truths of indigenous wisdom. Elias pulled over, the gravel crunching under his tires, and stepped out into the chill, the silence enveloping him like a blanket, no crickets chirping, no breeze stirring, just the vast Colorado night and this phantom before him, who now stood, or rather floated, motionless, her form translucent yet vivid, revealing glimpses of the landscape through her. And as he approached, words formed not in sound, but in his mind, a gentle, soothing voice like the murmur of a distant stream, urging him to follow, to uncover the buried secret that bound her to this highway, a truth from ancient times when the land was shaped by cataclysmic forces, volcanic eruptions, and glacial shifts that entombed an entire civilization beneath what was now this unassuming road. Compelled by an invisible force, Elias followed her lead, her gliding form guiding him off the pavement into the scrubland, where the ground softened underfoot, revealing faint outlines of what appeared to be ruins, low stone walls half buried in soil, artifacts of a people long erased from history, perhaps the elusive or even predecessors to the Anasazi, who harnessed geomagnetic energies for rituals that allowed shamans to levitate, a forgotten art documented in cryptic oral traditions passed down through Ute elders, but never committed to paper, lest the white man's greed exploit it. As they delved deeper, the phantom, whom Elias sensed was named, a name meaning eternal blossom in some Algonquian dialects, though she hailed from these western lands, shared visions in his thoughts, flashes of a thriving village ago, where priests used crystal alignments to defy gravity, walking beside galloping herds without touching earth, a harmony with nature disrupted by a great earthquake that swallowed their homes, trapping souls in limbo, bound to warn future generations of the land's volatile power, hidden from modern eyes by layers of time and deliberate forgetting. As early explorers dismissed such sites as pagan myths, paving over them with trails that became highways, tension built as Elias unearthed a central artifact, a glowing quartz obelisk pulsing with inner light, inscribed with runes that matched no known language, but resonated with quantum theories he'd read about, suggesting ancient knowledge of zero-point energy. A twist revealing that the phantom wasn't merely a ghost, but a projected echo, a holographic remnant from a civilization advanced in ways we'd call supernatural. And as he touched it, the ground trembled, releasing a surge of energy that threatened to reopen old faults, a climax where form flickered, her plea turning urgent, forcing Elias to choose between claiming the discovery for fame or sealing it to prevent catastrophe. His complex character torn between ambition and reverence, the rising suspense of seismic rumbles and swirling winds culminating in his decision to rebury the obelisk, honoring the forgotten truths by letting them rest, allowing spirit to finally dissipate into peace, her form dissolving into starlight with a grateful whisper, leaving Elias transformed, the highway returning to its silent vigil, a satisfying resolution where he drives away under the dawn, carrying the weight of hidden history, knowing that some mysteries are meant to soothe the soul rather than stir the world. As the sun dipped low over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the vast, empty stretches of Colorado's forgotten highways, where the wind whispered secrets from a time long before the first settlers laid their tracks upon the earth. And in the quiet hush of twilight, when the world seemed to hold its breath, drivers on a particular desolate road, known only to locals, as the silent highway reported glimpses of a spectral figure gliding effortlessly beside their vehicles, never quite touching the ground, a phantom whose presence stirred the soul with an inexplicable mix of wonder and unease, drawing us back to the hidden layers of history buried beneath the asphalt and the dust. A road that wound through the high plains near the mountains, not always a path for modern travelers, but once the ancient migration routes of the Ute people, who spoke in hushed tones of spirits that walked the earth without leaving footprints, guardians of forgotten truths from an era when the land was alive, with the echoes of civilizations that predated even the great pueblos of the ancestral. And it was along this very stretch that Elias, a weary archaeologist from Denver, found himself driving one crisp autumn evening, his old Jeep kicking up dust on the cracked pavement. The engine's hum the only sound, piercing the profound silence that gave the highway its name. Elias was a man in his late 40s, with sun-weathered skin and a beard streaked with gray. His eyes sharp from years spent squinting at faded inscriptions on canyon walls. A scholar whose passion for the past had cost him a marriage and left him with little more than a collection of journals filled with sketches of petroglyphs and theories about lost cultures, always chasing the elusive thread that connected America's indigenous peoples to even older, more enigmatic origins. Perhaps the Clovis hunters who roamed these lands 13,000 years ago, or mysterious seafarers from across the Pacific whose artifacts occasionally surfaced in unexpected digs. And on this night, as the sky deepened from amber to indigo, Elias was returning from a fruitless excavation in the Sand Valley, where he'd hoped to uncover evidence of pre-Columbian trade routes, but found only eroded pottery shards that told no new stories, his mind heavy with disappointment, the radio tuned to static, as if even the airwaves respected the highway's eerie quietude. The rumors had reached him earlier that day, over a greasy plate of eggs at a diner inn, where truckers with calloused hands and distant stares gathered at the counter, their voices low as they spoke of not the kind who begged for rides with a cardboard sign, but a woman who appeared out of nowhere, her form translucent and graceful, packing alongside speeding semis at 60 miles an hour without breaking stride, her feet hovering inches above the ground, never touching the earth, her long robes flowing like river mist, embroidered with symbols that no one could quite describe, but which evoked a sense of ancient ritual. And one old-timer, a Navajo man named Joe, with a silver, turquoise necklace glinting under the fluorescent lights, leaned in close and whispered that she'd been seen for generations, a spirit tied to the land's buried secrets, perhaps a remnant of the Utes sky people legends, beings who descended from the stars and taught the tribes to walk in harmony with the winds, stories dismissed by academics like Elias as metaphorical folklore. Yet here in the diner's warmth, amid the clink of coffee cups, those tales carried a weight that made his skepticism waver, planting a seed of intrigue that blossomed as he hit the road again, the highway unfurling before him like a forgotten scroll. Miles ticked by under the Jeep's tires, the landscape a monotonous blur of sagebrush and distant mesas, the air growing cooler as night fully claimed the sky, stars emerging one by one like pinpricks in a vast black canvas. And Elias' thoughts drifted to the historical enigmas that had defined his career, the unexplained vanishings of entire villages in the 1500s, noted in the journals of Spanish explorers like Francisco, who described settlements where the inhabitants ascended into the heavens, leaving behind only echoes and empty hearths. Accounts often attributed to exaggeration or disease, but Elias wondered if they masked deeper truths. Cataclysmic events like earthquakes or volcanic activity that swallowed communities whole, or perhaps ritualistic migrations guided by shamans who harnessed natural forces in ways lost to time. And intertwined with these were whispers of even older civilizations, the Fremont people to the north, whose rock art depicted humanoid figures floating above the ground, arms outstretched as if in flight, symbols that some interpreted as drug-induced visions, but which Elias believed hinted at forgotten knowledge. Maybe acoustic levitation using sound waves from ceremonial drums, or magnetic alignments with the Earth's lines. Ideas he'd explored in unpublished papers, always on the fringe of accepted archaeology. It was around midnight when the first anomaly occurred, a subtle chill that seeped into the cab despite the heater's blast, and Elias glanced at his dashboard, nodding the temperature gauge steady. Yet his breath fogged the windshield. And then, in the corner of his eye, movement, smooth, unnatural, paralleling the Jeep at precisely his speed, 55 miles per hour. A figure emerging from the darkness, not running but gliding, her bare feet suspended above the gravel shoulder, toes pointed downward, yet never brushing the earth, her body upright and poised, long hair cascading like a waterfall of shadow. And as Elias slowed, rubbernecking in disbelief, she matched his deceleration seamlessly, her eyes luminous, piercing, meeting his through the side window, not with hostility, but with an ancient sorrow, a silent invitation that tugged at something primal within him. And he slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust, his heart racing as he fumbled for his flashlight, stepping out into the crisp air that smelled of pine and ozone. The silence so absolute it rang in his ears. No insects buzzing, no wind rustling the bushes, just him and this apparition, who now hovered motionless 10 feet away, her form semi-transparent, allowing the starry backdrop to shimmer through her like a veil. "Who are you?" Elias whispered, his voice cracking in the void. But no audible response came. Instead, images flooded his mind, vivid and unbidden, like a dream imposed upon wakefulness. A vision of this same highway ago, not paved, but a dirt trail trodden by moccasin-clad feet. A procession of people in feathered headdresses, carrying quartz crystals that glowed with inner light, chanting in a language that resonated with the earth's hum, performing rituals at solstice alignments where the veil between worlds thinned, allowing select individuals to lift from the ground, defying gravity through focused energy, a practice drawn from ancestors who had crossed the Bering Strait bearing secrets from Siberian shamans, blended with local geomancy. And in the vision, catastrophe struck. a massive tremor splitting the land, swallowing the village into a chasm, trapping souls in an eternal limbo, bound to guide the worthy to rediscover the hidden knowledge before it could be misused by those who sought power over preservation. Compelled by this telepathic pull, Elias followed her as she glided off the road into the scrubland, his boots crunching on dry earth while she left no mark, no sound, leading him deeper into the wilderness, where the terrain dipped into a shallow arroyo, revealing faint outlines of stone foundations, ruins long overgrown with yucca and cactus, structures that predated the known sites, perhaps belonging to a forgotten branch of the basket maker culture, whose baskets weren't just for carrying, but woven with conductive fibers to channel static electricity from thunderstorms, aiding in their levitation rites. And as they progressed, more visions unfolded, detailed scenes of daily life in this ancient community. Children playing with hovering stones, manipulated by harmonic vibrations from clay flutes. Elders teaching the young to attune their bodies to the planet's magnetic field, drawing on lines that converged here, a nexus point marked on no modern map, but evident in the anomalous compass readings Elias had noted in old survey logs, hidden stories suppressed by 19th century anthropologists who favored Darwinian progress over indigenous mysticism, fearing it would undermine manifest destiny's narrative. The phantom, whom Elias now sensed was named, a name echoing from Algonquian roots, but adapted here, meaning eternal blossom in the context of cyclical rebirth, halted at a central mound, her ethereal hand gesturing toward a buried cache, and Elias, drawing on his archaeologist's instincts, began to dig with his hands, unearthing shards of obsidian tools etched with spiral motifs symbolizing ascension. And deeper still, an intact clay tablet inscribed with pictographs depicting this ritual, a forgotten truth linking this site to similar phenomena worldwide, like the levitating monks of Tibet or the floating saints of medieval Europe, suggesting a universal human heritage of harnessing subtle energies, now lost to industrialization's clamor. Hours passed in this trance-like state, the night air alive with subtle energies that made Elias' skin tingle. And as he uncovered more, the tension mounted, a low rumble from the earth, as if the land itself protested the disturbance, visions turning darker, showing how Spanish conquistadors had stumbled upon a similar site, exploiting the crystals for alchemical experiments, leading to a curse that bound Spirit, forcing her to wander the highway built over the ruins, warning travelers away from repeating the hubris. And Elias realized the plot twist. She wasn't merely a guide, but a sentinel, testing his intent. For if he claimed the artifacts for personal glory, it would trigger a seismic event, reopening the ancient fault line, endangering nearby towns like Hooper, and communities built oblivious to the volatile geology beneath. His character deepened in this moment. Flashbacks to his youth revealing a boy orphaned young, drawn to history as a way to reclaim lost connections. His skepticism, a shield against vulnerability. But here, face to face with the phantom, that armor cracked, rising tension culminating in a whirlwind of dust and spectral lights as the ground heaved, forcing Elias to confront his ambitions, fame in academic circles versus honoring the land's guardians. And in the climax, as cracks spiderwebbed the soil and his form flickered like a failing hologram, he chose reverence, reburying the tablet and crystals, reciting a makeshift prayer drawn from Ute lore he'd studied, sealing the site with a cairn of stones. And as the tremors subsided, his eyes softened, her voice in his mind whispering gratitude, her figure dissolving into motes of light that ascended to the stars, freeing her at last, leaving Elias alone under the dawn's first blush, transformed, the highway behind him resuming its silent watch, a repository of forgotten truths now entrusted to his silent keeping. But the story didn't end there, for Elias returned to Denver changed, his Jeep laden with notes, but no physical proof, dedicating his remaining years to subtle advocacy, funding preservation efforts for indigenous sites without revealing the supernatural encounter, weaving the mystery into lectures that inspired a new generation of archaeologists to look beyond the tangible, exploring how ancient peoples might have used piezoelectric quartz to generate fields that mimicked levitation, theories bolstered by modern experiments in acoustic suspension. And though skeptics scoffed, locals along the silent highway reported fewer. As if vigil had eased, the land's secrets safer in obscurity. Years later, on a similar twilight drive, a young historian named Lena Elias experienced a faint echo, a whisper on the wind, not a full apparition, but a guiding intuition leading her to a nearby petroglyph panel, newly exposed by erosion, depicting the very rituals he described. A hidden story resurfacing gently, without catastrophe, affirming that some truths emerge when the time is right, in harmony with the earth's patient rhythm. And as Lena drove on, the highway's silence felt less ominous, more like a lullaby from ancient times, inviting reflection and rest, expanding further into the narrative's depths. Let's trace back to the origins of the silent highway, long before European boots trod its soil, when the land was shaped by glacial retreats at the end of the Pleistocene, carving valleys where early Paleo-Indians hunted megafauna with atlatls tipped in Clovis points. And among these nomads were visionaries who noticed peculiar spots where stones seemed lighter, where during thunderstorms, pebbles danced on the ground from electrostatic charges, inspiring the first experiments in what we'd call parapsychology, but they knew as spirit walking, passed down through oral traditions to the Ute, who incorporated it into their bear dance ceremonies. Hidden elements fictionalized here as a secret society of windwalkers. Shamans selected for their sensitivity to geomagnetic fluctuations, training in secluded canyons to achieve brief moments of levitation, using resonant chants to align with the resonance, the Earth's natural frequency, a forgotten science that explained the phantom's ability to pace cars. Her form, an energy imprint, replaying like a loop in time. Elias, in his post-encounter life, delved into these connections, traveling to analogous sites, the lines in Peru, where ancient figures might have served as levitation grids, or Stonehenge, with its acoustic properties, and corresponded with fringe researchers, piecing together a global puzzle of lost technologies, all while grappling with personal demons, including visions of in his dreams, urging him to protect other nexus points across Colorado, like the mysterious rock formations in Garden of the Gods, rumored to harbor similar spirits, adding layers of adventure as he evaded corporate interests seeking to mine the areas for rare earth minerals that coincidentally amplified these energies. Subplots emerged. A rival archaeologist, Dr. Harlan, a slick opportunist funded by oil companies, who caught wind of Elia's subtle hints and launched his own expedition, forcing Elias into a race against time, navigating bureaucratic hurdles with the Bureau of Land Management, forging alliances with Ute tribal elders who shared guarded lore, revealing that was once a real woman, who sacrificed herself during the earthquake to stabilize the land, her spirit enduring as a protector, and in a twist, unearthed a lesser artifact, a crystal shard that granted temporary levitation, but at the cost of madness, leading to his downfall in a dramatic confrontation amid a sudden storm, where Elias intervened, returning the shard to the earth, solidifying his role as steward. The resolution broadened, with Elias establishing a foundation for ethical archaeology, mentoring Lena, who carried the torch, uncovering more hidden stories, links to Viking explorers via in Oklahoma, or Asian influences in Pacific Northwest totems, ensuring the phantom's legacy-inspired discovery without destruction. The silent highway remaining a conduit for those attuned to its whispers, a calming reminder that history's mysteries unfold at their own pace, lulling the curious into contemplative peace. Yet the tale weaves even longer threads, exploring the cultural tapestry of Colorado's high plains, where Spanish missions in the 1700s intersected with native resistance, friars documenting demonic levitations that were likely misinterpretations of Ute rituals, suppressed in Vatican archives, but echoed in local folklore. And Elias, in his later years, journeyed to Europe to access those documents, facing intrigue from secretive orders guarding ancient knowledge, adding espionage elements to his quest, all while the phantom's influence manifested in synchronicities, books falling open to relevant pages, dreams foretelling finds, building to a grand climax, where, on the highway's anniversary, a gathering of descendants reconsecrated the site, releasing residual energies in a display of lights mistaken for auroras, bringing closure to centuries of unrest. In this expansive narrative, characters like Joe, the Navajo diner patron, reappear, revealed as a modern windwalker, guiding Elias indirectly. And Lena's arc involves reconciling science with spirituality, her own encounter with a faint echo affirming the cycle. The story a soothing immersion into America's veiled past, where mystery and discovery blend into a dreamlike flow, inviting listeners to drift into slumber with visions of floating spirits and hidden ruins dancing in their minds. As the echoes of Sliberation faded into the Colorado dawn, Elias drove back to Denver with a newfound serenity, the silent highway receding in his mirror like a dream half-remembered. Yet the land's ancient whispers lingered in his veins, urging him to delve deeper into the web of forgotten histories that crisscrossed the American West, where beneath the sun-baked earth lay not just bones and artifacts, but the pulsating remnants of civilizations that had mastered the unseen forces of nature. And in the weeks that followed, Elias found himself drawn back to the archives of the Denver Museum, poring over yellowed maps and indigenous oral transcripts that hinted at a network of sacred sites aligned with celestial events, places where the veil between worlds thinned not just at solstice, but during geomagnetic storms, allowing glimpses of the past to bleed into the present. And it was during one such research session, late at night, when the museum's halls were empty save for the hum of fluorescent lights, that Elias uncovered a cryptic reference to a shadow council, a clandestine group of Ute shamans who had guarded the levitation secrets through centuries, passing them orally to avoid the prying eyes of colonizers. A hidden story intertwined with the forced relocations of the 1800s, when treaties like the Agreement stripped the tribes of their ancestral lands, burying not only villages, but the knowledge of energy nexuses that could uplift or destroy. Elias' life took on a rhythmic calm, his days filled with lectures at the university, where he wove subtle threads of mysticism into academic discourse, inspiring students like Lena, a sharp-minded graduate with roots in the Pueblo communities, her dark hair often tied back as she sketched petroglyphs in her notebook, her skepticism mirroring his own former self, yet her curiosity ignited by his tales of the silent highway. And together, they embarked on field trips to peripheral sites, like the enigmatic rock alignments near, where boulders seemed placed by giants to channel underground aquifers' vibrations, creating natural harmonics that made the air shimmer. And in these moments, Elias felt's presence as a gentle breeze, a soothing affirmation that his choice to rebury the obelisk had preserved balance, allowing the land to heal from the scars of mining booms and railroad expansions that had ravaged the Rockies in the Gilded Age. Forgotten truths about how those industrial barons, like the, had unwittingly disturbed similar sites, unleashing minor hauntings dismissed as minor superstitions. But serenity is fragile on such ancient grounds, and one moonless night, as Elias and Lena camped near the highway's edge to monitor auroral activity, hopping to correlate it with Ute star lore, a subtle unease crept in, the kind that raises hairs on the neck without cause, the campfire's flames flickering unnaturally low despite no wind. And Elias dismissed it as fatigue from the drive, sharing stories of the Fremont people's floating figures etched into Utah's canyons, perhaps symbolic of out-of-body journeys induced by plants like datura, harvested in ritual from the high deserts. Yet, as midnight approached, Lena stirred from her sleeping bag, her voice a whisper. "Do you hear that?" And indeed, a low thrumming emanated from the earth, not audible but felt in the bones, like the prelude to an earthquake. And then, in the distance, along the highway's dark ribbon, a figure materialized, not graceful form, but something distorted, a whose glide was jerky, unnatural, its feet hovering but dragging ethereal tendrils that scraped the air with a soundless screech, its robes tattered and stained with what looked like ancient blood, eyes not sorrowful, but hollow voids that sucked in the starlight. And as it approached their camp at an accelerating pace, the temperature plummeted, frost rimming the tent poles in seconds, the horror unfolding as the phantom's face resolved into a grotesque mask, features melting like wax, revealing glimpses of skeletal remains beneath, a twisted remnant perhaps of a shaman who had abused the levitation rites, corrupted by greed during the village's fall, bound not to guide, but to ensnare souls who disturbed the balance. Panic surged as the entity closed in, its presence warping reality, the campfire extinguishing in a puff of acrid smoke, shadows lengthening into claw-like appendages that reached toward Lena, who froze in terror, her breath visible in plumes, and Elias, heart hammering, recalled fragments from the Shadow Council's lore, a warning of the devourer, a dark echo born when sacred knowledge was twisted, feeding on the fear of intruders. And in that horrifying instant, as the phantom's maw opened wide, emitting a silent scream that reverberated in their minds like shattering glass, visions assaulted them, scenes of the ancient catastrophe not as a natural quake, but a ritual gone awry, shamans vying for power, unleashing a rift that swallowed the innocent while trapping the guilty in eternal hunger. And Elias shouted incantations pieced from mute prayers, his voice cracking, while Lena fumbled for a quartz shard from their dig kit, holding it aloft as it glowed faintly. repelling the entity with a burst of light that illuminated its decaying form. Maggots of shadow writhing across its skin. The climax, a whirlwind of dust and spectral howls as the devourer recoiled, dissolving into wisps that fled back to the highway, leaving behind a scorched circle on the ground and the acrid scent of ozone, their breaths ragged in the returning silence, the horror etching itself into their psyches, yet ultimately strengthening their resolve to protect the secrets. From that night onward, Elia's and Lena's partnership deepened, the horror moment a catalyst for caution, as they mapped more sites with reverence, consulting elders like Joe, who revealed himself as a descendant of the Windwalkers, teaching them protective chants under the vast Colorado skis, where meteor showers traced paths once walked by floating ancestors. And in time, the silent highway became a place of pilgrimage for those attuned. Whispers of the phantom now mingled with tales of the devourer, a duality reminding all that history's hidden layers hold both beauty and peril. The land's forgotten truths unfolding like a river's meander, calm on the surface, but with undercurrents that could pull one under. Yet, in sharing these stories around campfires, Elias found peace, his voice a soothing narration that lulled listeners into contemplation. The mysteries of the past inviting dreams where spirits glided harmlessly, horizons endless under starry vaults. Expanding the tapestry further, consider the broader implications of such encounters, how they echo through American folklore, from the Bell Witch of Tennessee to the of the Southwest, suggesting a continent riddled with energy vortices where the veil frays. And Elias, in his twilight years, authored a veiled memoir disguised as fiction, influencing a wave of eco-archaeologists who blended science with indigenous wisdom, preventing developments that might awaken more devourers, like proposed fracking near that could fracture the nexuses. And Lena, rising in her field, discovered parallel sites in New Mexico's canyon, where Anasazi kivas aligned with solstice sun daggers might have facilitated similar levitations. Her excavations careful, always with protective rituals, uncovering artifacts that hummed with residual power. Plot twists revealing connections to cultures via trade routes. Jade pendants etched with floating gods, hidden from conquistadors who sought gold but feared the supernatural. Subplots wove in, such as Return, haunted by his brief levitation experience, seeking redemption by aiding Elias against corporate encroachers. His character arc from antagonist to ally, adding depth. And Joe's mentorship extended to Vision's quests in the mountains, where participants fasted to attune to the Earth's pulse, occasionally glimpsing benign phantoms that offered guidance. The narrative, a harmonious blend of adventure and introspection. The horror of that night, a pivotal shadow that heightened the light of discovery, ensuring the story's flow remained immersive, drawing one deeper into slumber's embrace with each whispered revelation. Yet the land held more layers, delving into pre-Clovis enigmas, like the controversial Topper site in South Carolina, suggesting human presence 20,000 years ago, linked perhaps by migratory paths to Colorado's plains, where mammoth bones bore marks of tools that vibrated at frequencies to ease carving, forgotten innovations, and Elia's final journey back to the highway, alone under a full moon, where Echo appeared once more, not in horror, but in gratitude, her form whole and luminous, gliding beside him one last time before ascending. A satisfying closure that left the silent highway to its eternal watch. Mysteries preserved for those who listen with open hearts, as the moon waned over the expansive Colorado landscape, casting silvery hues across the undulating plains where the silent highway cut its lonely path. Elias and Lena found themselves inexorably drawn back into the web of ancient enigmas. Their encounter with the devourer, not a conclusion, but a harbinger of deeper revelations. For the land held secrets layered like sedimentary rock, each stratum revealing forgotten epochs of human endeavor and cosmic interplay. And in the quiet aftermath of that terrifying night, as they packed their camp under the first light of dawn, Elias noticed subtle anomalies. A compass needle spinning erratically, wildflowers blooming out of season around the scorched circle left by the entity, signs that the nexus point's energies had been stirred, perhaps awakening other guardians or echoes from the past, prompting them to consult Joe once more at his modest ranch near, where adobe walls adorned with dream catchers and shelves lined with herbal bundles created an atmosphere of timeless wisdom. And over steaming cups of sage tea, Joe revealed fragments of a larger mythology, speaking of the Earth Weavers, a pan-tribal alliance predating recorded history, comprising Ute, Hopi, and even distant Apache seers, who convened at convergence sites to weave the fabric of reality, using levitation not for show, but to mend rifts caused by celestial impacts, like the meteor craters dotting the southwest. Hidden stories of how these weavers had deflected greater disasters, their rites inscribed in coded petroglyphs that modern satellites mistook for natural erosion patterns. Lena, with her analytical mind honed by years of fieldwork, began cross-referencing Joe's tales with geological surveys, uncovering anomalies in seismic data from the 1800s, when gold rush prospectors reported ghost quakes along the highway's precursor trails, vibrations without aftershocks that coincided with full moons, suggesting cyclic activations of the buried quartz veins that acted as natural amplifiers. And together, the trio embarked on a quest to map these veins, driving Dusty in Joe's weathered pickup, stopping at overlooked outcrops where Elias used dowsing rods tools he'd once scoffed at, but now embraced to detect subtle magnetic pulls, the narrative unfolding like a river branching into tributaries, each exploration revealing artifacts, a carved bone flute that, when blown, produced infrasound capable of lifting small stones, a relic from the basket maker era, demonstrating acoustic principles akin to those in ancient Greek theaters, forgotten truths about how these sounds harmonized with the earth's resonant frequency to enable the wind walker's feats. And as they delved, personal backstories enriched the tapestry, Lena confiding her Pueblo grandmother's bedtime stories of floating kachinas who protected against invaders, mirroring role, while Joe shared his Vietnam War scars, how the chaos there drove him back to ancestral ways for healing. His quiet strength, an anchor amid the mysteries. Tension simmered as external forces intruded. Word of their discreet digs reaching Dr. Harlan, who, far from redeemed, saw opportunity in the rumors, allying with a shadowy energy conglomerate eyeing the region's untapped geothermal potential. Their surveys unwittingly targeting the nexus points. And in a plot twist, approached Elias under guise of collaboration, his polished demeanor hiding desperation from lingering hallucinations induced by the crystal shard. Visions of devouring shadows that eroded his sanity, leading to a clandestine meeting at a motel in Monte Vista, where fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects and produced stolen maps from tribal archives, revealing a master alignment of sites stretching from Colorado to Arizona's Superstition Mountains, a line grid that the earth weavers had maintained to stabilize tectonic plates. But its intent was exploitation, harnessing the energies for zero-point devices, a modern perversion of ancient rites. And Elias, sensing the peril, feigned interest while alerting Joe and Lena, setting the stage for a covert operation to safeguard the central obelisk Elias had reburied years prior. The horror resurfaced one stormy evening as they returned to the silent highway, thunder rumbling like distant war drums, lightning illuminating the plains in stark flashes. And as rain pelted the windshield, a figure appeared, not its benevolent glide, nor the devourer's grotesque lurch, but a multitude, spectral forms rising from the asphalt like steam, in tattered period garb spanning eras, Ute warriors with hovering moccasins, Spanish soldiers levitating in rusted armor, 19th century miners floating with pickaxes aloft, all eyes vacant yet accusatory, their collective presence warping the air into a cacophony of silent screams that pressed against the mind. The Jeep's engine stalling as electromagnetic pulses surged, stranding them amid the phantoms who encircled the vehicle. Tendrils of ectoplasmic mist snaking through the cracks, chilling flesh and inducing visions of historical atrocities. The forced marches of the Trail of Tears echoed here, colonial massacres at Sand Creek bleeding into the land's memory. The entities not malevolent, but overwhelmed souls trapped in the Nexus's feedback loop, amplified by the storm's charge. And in the climax of terror, as the figures merged into a swirling vortex threatening to lift the jeep skyward in a destructive ascent, Lena recited the protective chants Joe had taught, her voice steady amid the chaos, while Elias clutched the bone flute, blowing a resonant note that pierced the veil, dispersing the apparitions in a burst of ethereal light, the rain washing away the residue as calm returned, leaving them breathless. The horror, a visceral reminder of the cumulative traumas imprinted on the earth. From this ordeal, alliances exposed when his corporate backers abandoned him upon leaked evidence of unethical digs. His downfall, a quiet institutionalization where he raved of floating horrors. And Elias, Lena, and Joe established informal steward circles with tribal councils, sharing knowledge through oral workshops disguised as cultural festivals, preserving the hidden elements without documentation that could invite exploitation. The story expanding to include younger generations, like Lena's nephew, who showed innate sensitivity to the energies, training as a new windwalker, ensuring continuity as Elias aged gracefully, his beard fully silver, finding solace in stargazing from the highway's shoulder, where occasional benign glimmers, faint outlines of affirmed the balance restored, weaving further into the narrative's expanse. Consider the intersections with broader American mysteries, such as links to the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, where Mississippian cultures built earthen pyramids aligned with solstices, perhaps exchanging levitation lore via trade networks that spanned the continent, evidenced by similar quartz artifacts found in Colorado digs, and Elias' correspondence with Eastern scholars uncovered parallels to Appalachian ghost lights, natural plasmas mistaken for spirits, but potentially remnants of migrated weavers' rites, adding layers of migration epics where ancient peoples traversed ice-free corridors, carrying shamanic traditions from Asia's Altai Mountains, where similar floating monk legends persisted, a global thread that Lena pursued in her doctorate, traveling to international conferences while safeguarding the core secrets. Subplots proliferated, a romantic undercurrent between Lena and a fellow researcher, tested by the perils of a near-miss cave-in at a subsidiary site, revealing glowing fungi that induced hallucinatory levitations, a biological twist on the ancient practices, and Joe's quiet battle with developers proposing wind farms that could disrupt the magnetic fields. His activism, a gentle force culminating in legal protections via the Antiquities Act, echoes of Teddy's conservation ethos intertwined with indigenous sovereignty. As seasons cycled, the silent highway evolved from a place of dread to into one of reverence, locals sharing tales around bonfires of how the phantoms now guided lost travelers safely. A soothing transformation where mystery fostered community, the forgotten truths blooming like desert flowers after rain, inviting all who traversed its path to pause, listen, and drift into the timeless embrace of history's lullaby, where discovery and peace intertwined eternally. As the line grids, secrets unraveled further under the relentless scrutiny of Elias, Lena, and Joe. The silent highway began to pulse with an undercurrent of unrest, as if the earth itself resented the probing into its veiled past. And one fateful autumn, when the aspen leaves turned blood red against the stark Rockies, the trio ventured into a newly mapped subsidiary site, a hidden gorge near the great sand dunes, where ancient dunes whispered of Pleistocene winds that had carried the first weavers' ancestors across the continent, their footprints erased by time, but their energies etched into the quartzite bedrock. And as they descended the narrow trail, flashlights cutting through the gathering dusk, a palpable dread settled like fog, the air thickening with the scent of ozone and decay, foreshadowing the horror that awaited in the gorge's depths, where petroglyphs glowed faintly under UV light, depicting not just floating figures, but contorted ones, twisted in agony as if caught mid-transformation. Symbols Joe interpreted as warnings of the corrupted, shamans who had delved too greedily into the levitation arts, merging their essences with dark geomagnetic voids, becoming eternal predators that lurked in the shadows of nexus points, feeding on the life force of the unwary. The horror ignited without warning as they reached the gorge's floor, the ground soft and treacherous underfoot, and Lena's boot sank into what felt like quicksand, but pulsed with a rhythmic throb, like a heartbeat from beneath the earth, pulling her downward with unnatural strength, her cries echoing off the walls as Elias and Joe rushed to her aid, ropes thrown in haste. But then the shadows stirred, coalescing into forms that light elongated silhouettes with limbs too many and too long, gliding not above the ground, but through it, emerging like oil from cracks in the rock, their hover a mocking perversion of grace, eyes manifesting as pinpricks of void that absorbed all warmth. And as one latched onto Lena's ankle, its touch a searing cold that numbed her leg instantly, visions assaulted her mind, grotesque flashbacks to the corrupted's origin, a ritual ago where ambitious weavers invoked forbidden alignments during a solar eclipse, ripping open a rift that inverted their powers, turning ascension into descent, their bodies dissolving into spectral parasites that haunted the grid, devouring souls to sustain their fractured existence. And Elias, hauling on the rope with veins bulging, felt the entity's gaze shift to him, a psychic probe that unearthed his deepest fears, reliving his parents' fatal car crash on a similar lonely road, twisted metal, and screams amplified into eternity. The horror intensifying as more corrupted rose, their forms merging into a writhing mass that blocked the gorge's exit. The air filling with a subsonic wail that vibrated bones to the point of fracture. Joe's chants faltering as one entity enveloped him, its tendrils burrowing into his skin like living thorns, drawing forth memories of war horrors blended with ancient atrocities. Vietnamese jungles morphing into blood-soaked Ute, where colonial blades met shamanic fury. Panic clawed at their throats as the entities tightened their grip, the gorge transforming into a nightmarish arena where gravity warped, lifting loose stones to pelt them like hail from hell. Lena's leg, now blackened with frostbite-like corruption, spreading upward, her screams turning guttural as the visions showed the corrupted's insatiable hunger. Having claimed countless victims over centuries, lost hikers, wayward miners, even conquistadors whose journals hinted at demons that drank the soul through the feet, hidden truths buried in Spanish archives as madness. And Elias, in a desperate surge, recalled the bone flute's power, fumbling it from his pack amid the chaos, blowing a discordant note that clashed with the wail, creating a sonic rift that stunned the entities momentarily, their forms flickering like bad signals, allowing Joe to break free and hurl sacred tobacco into the mass, the smoke repelling them with ethereal hisses. But the climax peaked in terror as the lead corrupted swelled to monstrous size, its maw opening to reveal rows of spectral teeth dripping shadow ichor, lunging at Elias with a speed that blurred reality, its breath a vacuum that stole his air, visions of his own corruption flashing his body, twisting into one of them, eternally bound to the highway, preying on innocence. And in that abyss of fear, Lena, half dragged from the mire, thrust the quartz shard forward, channeling the storm's latent energy from above. A lightning strike drawn down through the grid, exploding the entity in a cascade of dark shards that rained harmlessly as dust, the remaining corrupted retreating into the cracks with agonized shrieks, leaving the trio collapsed, battered and breathless. The gorge returning to silence, broken only by their ragged gasps, the horror etching scars on their spirits, yet forging unbreakable bonds. In the wake of this visceral ordeal, the story's threads wove onward, Elias nursing wounds that went beyond the physical, his dreams haunted by the corrupted's voids, prompting him to seek solace in deeper historical dives, uncovering links to similar phenomena in the Dust Bowl era, when drought-ravaged farmers reported shadow walkers that lifted cattle midair before draining them dry, dismissed as hallucinations, but aligning with disrupted nexus points from overfarming. And Lena, her leg, but functional after tribal healing rites involving hot stones and chants, threw herself into advocacy, partnering with environmental groups to protect the dunes from tourism encroachment that could awaken more horrors. Her character evolving from skeptic to fierce guardian, while Joe revealed a hidden cache of Weaver artifacts in his ranch basement, ancient drums, whose beats could summon protective barriers, tools they used in subsequent expeditions to fortify sites against resurgence. Plot twists emerged as from his asylum confines sent cryptic letters hinting at a corporate cabal aware of the grid's power, seeking to weaponize it for electromagnetic warfare. Their experiments in remote labs mimicking the corrupted's inversions, leading to a shadowy pursuit where the trio evaded surveillance drones over the plains, blending into Ute reservations where elders shared prophecies of a great unraveling if the balance tipped, adding espionage to the mix as they infiltrated a facility near Pueblo, disabling devices that pulsed with stolen quartz, the tension building to another horror peak inside the lab's core, where test subjects, volunteers lured by false promises, hovered in agony, their forms distorting into corrupted-like abominations under artificial fields, screams echoing in sterile halls as alarms blared. The escape a frantic dash through corridors alive with malfunctioning energies that birthed mini-entities, nipping at heels with freezing bites, culminating in a sabotage that imploded the chamber, burying the threat but leaving ethical quandaries in its wake, expanding the narrative's horizon, the history intertwined with transcontinental enigmas, like the Roanoke colony's disappearance, potentially linked to an eastern nexus where carvings mirrored Weaver spirals, suggesting migratory shamans carried the knowledge eastward, only for it to corrupt in isolation. And Elias' journeys took him to Virginia archives, where yellowed parchments spoke of flying devils that plagued early settlers, parallels that Lena digitized for an underground network of stewards, ensuring global vigilance against similar rifts. From lines in England's Avebury to Australia's Dreamtime paths, where Aboriginal elders whispered of floating yowies gone mad. Subplots flourished, a budding romance between Lena and Joe, challenged by generational gaps, and the weight of guardianship, tested in a vision quest where they confronted personal corrupted manifestations of inner demons and emerged stronger, while Elias mentored a cadre of young indigenous scholars, passing the flute and chants, his legacy a bulwark against forgetting. The silent highway now a conduit for controlled revelations, where controlled glimpses of offered guidance, countering the horrors with hope. The story, a labyrinthine flow of terror and triumph, lulling the soul into reflective depths, where ancient whispers promised that light endures, even in the darkest voids. Yet the horrors lingered in quieter moments, like when travelers reported new, not gliding gracefully, but lurching with predatory intent. Echoes of the corrupted testing the boundaries, prompting eternal vigilance. The land's forgotten truths a double-edged sword that cut deep but healed profoundly, inviting all who dared to listen into a timeless dance of shadow and starlight. As the guardians of the silent highway secrets pressed onward, their vigilance tested by the encroaching shadows of modern ambition, Elias found himself haunted by echoes that transcended mere memory, waking in the dead of night to the sensation of invisible tendrils brushing his skin, remnants of the corrupted that clung like psychic burrs, whispering insinuations of doubt and decay. And in Denver's quiet suburbs, where streetlights cast elongated shadows reminiscent of the gorge's horrors, he pored over newly acquired manuscripts from a clandestine auction, faded leather-bound tomes smuggled from Jesuit missions in Old Mexico, detailing encounters with levitating demons during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, hidden histories where native shamans had weaponized the grid against invaders, inverting Spanish horses mid-gallop into plummeting nightmares, their riders consumed by rifts that belched forth the corrupted's kin, entities described as soul eaters born of the earth's wrath. And Elias shared these findings with Lena and Joe over flickering candlelight in Joe's ranch, the air thick with incense to ward off unseen presences, plotting their next foray into a remote canyon near where satellite imagery hinted at buried alignments, a nexus potentially more potent than the highway's own, pulsing with untapped fury from volcanic epochs when lava flows had entombed weavers mid-ritual, their essences fossilized into malevolent guardians. The journey southward unfolded under a leaden sky pregnant with storm, the pickup's tires humming over cracked asphalt that echoed the highway's silent vigil. Lena at the wheel, with her leg aching in premonition, Joe murmuring protective incantations from the back seat, his turquoise amulet glowing faintly as if charged by proximity to the grid, and Elias, shotgun with maps spread across his lap, traced lines that converged on a forgotten arroyo, local legends speaking of the floating grave, a place where prospectors in the 1850s vanished, their claims abandoned amid reports of bodies hovering upside down, drained of blood and vitality, dismissed as tall tales, but aligning with the tome's accounts of inverted levitations, punishments for desecration. And as they parked at the trailhead, dusk enveloping the landscape in a shroud of purple twilight, a chill wind carried distant moans, not coyotes, but something human yet not, setting their nerves alight with anticipation and dread. Descending into the arroyo, flashlights piercing the gloom like hesitant probes, the ground grew unnaturally warm underfoot, steam rising from fissures that exhaled the scent of sulfur and rot. And Lena stumbled upon the first anomaly, a cluster of petroglyphs not etched, but burned into the rock, depicting weavers in ecstatic flight morphing into grotesque descents, limbs elongating into tentacles that pierced the earth, symbols Joe translated as a curse upon those who sought dominion over the energies. And deeper in, the horror manifested with visceral suddenness. The air thickened to syrup, slowing their movements as if gravity had tripled, and from the shadows emerged a singular entity, larger than the corrupted of before, a behemoth whose form cohesion, an amalgam of fused souls, Ute elders twisted with Spanish friars and gold-crazed miners, its massive frame gliding inches above the scorching soil, feet inverted and dangling upward like hanged men. Its head, a swirling vortex of faces screaming in silent agony, eyes multiplying across its torso like festering wounds that wept black ichor. And as it approached, the ground quaked, fissures widening to reveal skeletal hands clawing upward, grasping at ankles with bony fingers that burned like dry ice, pulling Joe downward into a maw of earth that hungered. His cries muffled as visions flooded him, reliving the revolt's massacres, blades and bullets replaced by spectral devouring, bodies lifted and slammed repeatedly until bones pulverized, the entity's psychic assault amplifying personal traumas. Joe's wore flashbacks, intertwining with ancestral slaughters, napalm morphing into volcanic eruptions that entombed the innocent. Elias lunged forward, flute in hand, but the behemoth's presence disrupted sound, notes warping into dissonant shrieks that fed its growth, swelling it further until it blocked the canyon's width, tendrils lashing out to ensnare Lena, wrapping her leg in coils that reignited the corruption. Black veins spiderwebbing up her thigh as she hallucinated her grandmother's kachina dances turning nightmarish. Puppets on strings jerked into oblivion by unseen puppeteers, the horror peaking as the entity opened its central maw, a gaping abyss ringed with teeth forged from shattered quartz, exhaling a gale of desiccated breath that flayed skin in invisible strips, drawing blood that levitated upward in crimson droplets to nourish its form. And in desperation, Elias shattered his amulet against the rock, releasing a burst of stored energy from prior rituals, a blinding flash that seared the behemoth's faces, eliciting howls that shattered nearby boulders, allowing Joe to wrench free from the grasping hands, his arms lacerated but functional, and together they channeled a unified chant, voices harmonizing with the flute's recovered melody, creating a resonant barrier that compressed the entity, forcing it to invert upon itself, collapsing into a singularity of shadow that imploded with a thunderclap, sucking in the skeletal appendages, and sealing the fissures in a rush of displaced air, leaving the arroyo but silent, the trio collapsing in exhaustion, hearts pounding from the brink of annihilation. Recovery came slowly in the days that followed, wounds bandaged with herbal poultices at Joe's ranch, where elders convened in a sweat lodge ceremony to purge the lingering taint, steam and songs weaving protective webs around their auras. And from this crucible, new insights emerged. The behemoth, a sentinel of the grid's core, awakened by distant meddlings, his asylum ravings now seen as portents, prompting Lena to hack into corporate databases under cover of night, uncovering blueprints for energy harvesters that mimicked the Weaver's alignments, but inverted, risking global rifts if deployed. A twist revealing the Cabal's leader as a descendant of those same Jesuit chroniclers, obsessed with reclaiming the demonic powers for a new age of control. And thus, the trio's mission expanded, allying with a network of global stewards, from Tibetan lamas guarding Himalayan vortices to Aboriginal keepers in the outback, exchanging encrypted missives that wove a digital line of resistance, preventing activations that could summon corrupted legions across continents. Personal arcs deepened amid the ongoing saga, Elias confronting his isolation through letters to a long-estranged daughter, sharing veiled tales of the highway that mended familial rifts, Lena embracing her heritage by leading youth workshops on balanced geomancy, teaching controlled levitations with safe crystals to foster wonder without peril. And Joe, ever the anchor, revealing a hidden lineage as a direct Weaver heir, his ranch a nexus disguised in plain sight, where subtle energies powered off-grid living, a sanctuary against the encroaching horrors. Yet the narrative threaded onward, intersecting with forgotten American epics like the lost colony of Roanoke, where similar inversions might explain the vanishing. Settlers lifted into voids by mishandled native rights, or the past incidents' American analogs in Colorado's backcountry. Hikers found contorted in 1950s reports suppressed by Cold War paranoia, linking to Soviet experiments that paralleled the Cabals, adding Cold War espionage layers as files surfaced. Elias traveling to Washington archives under alias, evading tales from corporate agents. His discoveries fueling a climactic confrontation at a remote test site near Area 51's fringes, where inverted fields birthed hybrid corrupted mechanical specters fused with ancient essences, gliding on anti-gravity paths that mocked the highway's phantoms. The horror unfolding in a desert storm of sand and shadow, entities swarming like locusts, their touches inducing instant aging, flesh withering as life force siphoned, the battle a symphony of chants clashing with EMP bursts, culminating in a grid overload that banished the abominations back to their rifts, sealing the site in a dome of stabilized energy. In quieter interludes, the silent highway offered respite, benign appearing to weary travelers as guides rather than threats. Its legacy a beacon amid the darkness, the land's truths unfolding in measured revelations that soothed rather than terrified, inviting reflection on humanity's place within the cosmic weave, where horror and harmony danced in eternal balance, lulling the spirit into profound, dream-filled repose under the vast, star-strewn canopy, as the Guardian's network spanned continents, binding ancient wisdom with modern defiance against the encroaching voids. Elias sensed a subtle fracture in the harmony they had fought so hard to maintain. A whisper of discord emanating from the silent highway itself, where reports trickled in from lone drivers of that no longer glided with ethereal grace, but lurched with predatory hunger, their forms flickering like faulty holograms under the moonlight. And in the quiet confines of his Denver study, surrounded by stacks of weathered tomes and glowing crystals that hummed with residual energy, Elias pored over digital missives from allies abroad, uncovering parallels to the corrupted in Celtic lore of the fairy folk, twisted by Iron Age intrusions into malevolent wraiths that lifted victims skyward only to dash them upon rocks. Hidden stories suppressed in monastic scripts that mirrored the weaver's inversions, suggesting a primordial global cataclysm, perhaps the younger Dryas impact that had shattered the grid ago, birthing these horrors as eternal scars on the Earth's psychic skin. And compelled by this revelation, Elias, Lena, and Joe for a return pilgrimage to the highway's heart. Under a harvest moon that bathed the plains in bloody amber, their vehicle laden with reinforced artifacts, drums etched with protective spirals, poultices of sacred herbs, and a newly forged quartz blade designed to sever spectral bonds. The drive southward a tense vigil, where conversation lapsed into watchful silence, the radio static crackling with half-heard voices that mimicked lost loved ones calling from beyond. Arriving at the familiar pull-off where Elias had first encountered, the air hung heavy with unnatural stillness. No nocturnal creatures stirring, the sagebrush frozen as if petrified. And as they stepped out, boots crunching on gravel that echoed unnaturally loud, a low fog rolled in from the distant mesas, coiling around their ankles like living chains. And Joe, ever attuned, murmured a warning chant, his breath visible despite the mild night, the temperature plummeting as the fog thickened into a miasma that carried the faint rot of unearthed graves. And Lena's leg throbbed in sync with an underground pulse, a harbinger that drew her gaze to the highway's edge, where the horror began to unfold with insidious slowness. A solitary, materializing from the mist, not gliding, but hovering in spasms, its body contorted at impossible angles, limbs bending backward like broken branches, skin translucent, yet veined with poolsing darkness that writhed like parasitic worms beneath, its head lolling sideways with a neck elongated to grotesque proportions, mouth agape in a perpetual silent scream that emitted no sound, but induced a ringing tinnitus in their ears. Eye sockets hollowed to abyssal depths, where tiny lights flickered like distant, malevolent stars. And as it approached, the ground beneath it cracked open in radial fissures, exhaling puffs of dust, laced with ancient bone fragments that danced upward in defiance of gravity, clinging to their clothes and burrowing into pores with stinging insistence. The entity's advance accelerated, its form multiplying in hallucinatory afterimages that surrounded them, each iteration more decayed than the last, flesh slewing off in ethereal strips that evaporated into smoke, revealing musculature twisted into runes of forgotten curses. And Elias felt the psychic onslaught first, an invasive probe that ransacked his mind, dredging up suppressed nightmares of his parents' crash, amplified into infinity, their mangled forms levitating from the wreckage to accuse him with bloodied lips. You left us to float in agony, the visions bleeding into collective torment as Lena relived her grandmother's deathbed, the old woman's body inverting mid-seizure, bones cracking as she hovered upside down, whispering prophecies of devouring shadows, while Joe was assailed by war horrors fused with ancestral genocides. Vietnamese villages lifted wholesale into vortexes where inhabitants were flayed alive by invisible winds, the corrupted's touch now physical, its tendrils extending like blackened vines that wrapped Elias' wrists, searing cold that necrotized flesh on contact, blisters forming and bursting with pus that glowed phosphorescent, the pain a symphony of fire and ice that paralyzed him as the entity lifted him inches off the ground, his feet dangling helplessly, gravity's betrayal turning his stomach as the highway tilted in vertigo, the mist solidifying into clawing hands that emerged from the pavement, skeletal fingers with nails like rusted nails scraping at Lena's legs, reopening old scars to ooze black ichor that burned like acid, her screams echoing as visions showed her own inversion, body folding inward until organs exposed, poolsing in the open air, the horror escalating as the forms converged into a colossal amalgamation, a towering behemoth of fused nightmares whose maw split open vertically from forehead to navel, lined with teeth that ground like tectonic plates, exhaling a gale of desiccated souls that buffeted them backward, stealing breath and vitality, skin wrinkling prematurely as years were siphoned in seconds. Joe's face aging decades in moments, his chants faltering into croaks as the entity fed, growing denser. Its hover now a thunderous levitation that cracked the asphalt into spider webs, threatening to swallow the entire stretch into a chasm of oblivion. In the pinnacle of terror, as the behemoth's core pulsed with stolen life, a rift tearing open behind it to reveal glimpses of an inverted underworld where victims floated eternally in torment, their pleas a cacophony that shattered nearby boulders into shrapnel. Elias mustered a final defiance, slashing the quartz blade through a tendril, sparks of pure energy erupting that singed the air, the blade humming with weaver harmonics as Lena joined. drumming a counter-rhythm on the sacred instrument despite her agony, the beats clashing with the entity's wail to create dissonant waves that frayed its form, edges unraveling like thread pulled from a loom. And Joe, drawing on his lineage's deepest reserves, hurled a pouch of ground meteorite, remnants from the cataclysm's source, into the maw, the powder igniting in a chain reaction that inverted the inversion, the behemoth collapsing inward with an implosive roar that sucked in the mist and fissures, sealing the rift in a flash of blinding light, the horror dissipating into harmless echoes that faded with the wind, leaving the trio sprawled on the cooled ground, bodies ravaged, but spirits unbroken. The silent highway resuming its vigil under the moon's indifferent gaze. From this abyss of fear, the narrative wove onward with renewed urgency, Elias' wounds healing slowly under elder care, the scars a map of resilience that he traced in quiet reflection, while Lena delved into forensic analyses of the bone dust, linking it to pre-Clovis remains carbon dated to the impact era, revealing the corrupted as mutated guardians warped by cosmic debris, their essence tied to iron-rich meteorites that disrupted the grid's purity. And Joe, rejuvenated through vision quests in the mountains, uncovered a hidden weaver enclave in a cave system where murals depicted the original mending rites, rituals they adapted to fortify the highway against future breaches. The Alliance expanding to include its reformed successor, a young engineer haunted by his mentor's fate, who engineered subtle dampeners, devices blending tech with shamanism to neutralize inversions without exploitation. Plot twists unfolding as corporate remnants launched op campaigns, spreading disinformation about highway cults to discredit the stewards, forcing underground operations where they navigated a labyrinth of allies and betrayals. From leaked Pentagon files on anomalous energies tested in black sites, to indigenous coalitions rallying at sacred summits, subplots deepened the expanse. Lena's romance with the engineer tested by a near-fatal encounter in a subsidiary nexus, where inverted wildlife, deer hovering with antlers turned inward, impaling themselves in madness, attacked their camp. The horror a brief but bloody skirmish that cemented their bond, while Elias reconciled with his daughter through shared dreams induced by crystal meditations, her visits to Colorado unveiling her own latent sensitivity, drawing her into the fold as a chronicler of the hidden histories, documenting oral tales in encrypted archives that preserved the weaver's legacy against digital erasure. And Joe's quiet wisdom guided intergenerational transfers. Youth apprentices learning to discern benign phantoms from corrupted echoes, ensuring the land's truths endured beyond their lifetimes. Yet the highway whispered of unresolved layers, intersections with extraterrestrial enigmas like the Roswell crash, where debris might have amplified local rifts, drawing UFO hunters into the fray. There, of floating orbs masking corrupted manifestations, adding ufology twists as Elias investigated crash site correlations, evading government watchers in high desert chases, the narrative a sprawling odyssey of shadows and revelations, where each horror forged greater light, the eternal dance, inviting wanderers to ponder the veil's fragility under starry infinities, lulling into contemplative slumbers where mysteries resolved in dreamtime harmonies. As the veil between worlds thinned further under the Guardian's watchful eyes, Elias, Lena, and Joe embarked on a perilous odyssey that transcended the silent highway's confines. Drawn by cryptic signals from the global network of stewards, faint electromagnetic pulses detected on improvised devices, echoing from a convergence point deep in the Black Canyon of a chasm carved by eons of river fury, where ancient weavers had allegedly sealed a primordial rift during the cataclysm's aftermath. Hidden histories whispered in Anasazi oral epics of the Great Swallow, a void that devoured entire clans before being bound by sacrificial levitations, their shamans hovering eternally as barriers against resurgence, and compelled by dreams where form flickered with urgency, warning of imbalances stirred by distant corporate tamperings in Antarctic ice cores that mirrored the grid's polar extensions. The trio set forth under a starless sky heavy with impending snow, their vehicle navigating treacherous switchbacks where sheer drops plunged into inky abysses, the air growing denser with each descent, laced with the metallic tang of ozone and the faint, unsettling hum of subterranean vibrations that set teeth on edge. Joe's amulet pulsing in rhythm as if alive, Lena's leg aching with prophetic throbs, and Elias clutching the quartz blade like a talisman, his mind racing through newly deciphered codices from Mayan ruins that paralleled the inversions, depicting gods inverted in underworld realms, their hungers insatiable for mortal essence. The canyon's mouth loomed like a jagged maw, walls of schist and gneiss rising imposingly under flashlight beams that barely pierced the gloom. And as they hiked deeper along a forgotten trail overgrown with twisted junipers, whose branches clawed at clothing like desperate fingers, the temperature inverted paradoxically, freezing at their feet, while waves of stifling heat radiated from the rock faces, steam hissing from cracks that exhaled whispers in archaic tongues, indecipherable yet laden with malice. And Lena's equipment beeped erratically, detecting geomagnetic spikes that warped compass needles into frantic spins, foreshadowing the horror that awaited at the rift's epicenter, a natural amphitheater where the river's roar muted to an ominous silence, the ground carpeted in peculiar frost patterns resembling fractal runes, and Joe halted abruptly, his voice a grave murmur. This is where the seal weakens. The corrupted here are elders of their kind, born from the impact's first wounds. His words hanging as the fog descended, not from above, but rising from the earth like exhaled breath from a colossal lung beneath, coiling into shapes that hinted at humanoid forms before dissolving, the air thickening to the point of resistance, each step a labor, as if wading through molasses infused with dread. Then, with a seismic groan that reverberated through bones and soul, the horror erupted in unrelenting ferocity. The ground split open in a yawning fissure that belched forth a miasma of shadow and sulfur, from which emerged not one entity, but a legion. The primordial corrupted, ancient shamans twisted beyond recognition, their bodies elongated to serpentine lengths that hovered in erratic loops. Skins stretched taut over skeletal frames etched with glowing impact craters like festering sores. Limbs into dozens of writhing appendages, tipped with hooked barbs that dripped viscous darkness. Heads fused into a collective hydra of faces, Ute features warped with prehuman grimaces, eyes orbiting like mad planets in sockets that wept meteoric tears, burning holes in the frost. And as they surged upward, the canyon walls came alive, petroglyphs animating into bas-relief horrors that peeled from the stone, floating carvings of inverted rituals that lunged with jagged edges, slicing the air with whispers turned to shrieks. The legions advance, creating a gravitational maelstrom that lifted pebbles and boulders alike, hurling them in cyclonic fury, while pulling the trio toward the fissure's maw, Elias' feet leaving the ground involuntarily, his body twisting midair as psychic barbs pierced his mind, flooding him with visions of the cataclysm's genesis, a comet's fiery descent shattering the grid, shamans ascending to mend it only to be inverted by the blast, their essences corrupted into eternal devourers that feasted on cosmic debris, now hungering for living warmth. The agony amplified as appendages latched onto his arms, barbs burrowing under skin like living drills, necrotizing tissue in spreading webs of black rot that crawled toward his heart, pain a white-hot symphony that blurred vision into hallucinatory hellscapes where his daughter's face morphed into a screaming void, accusing him of unleashing this by his quests. Lena fared no better, her leg ensnared by a tendril that inverted her orientation, flipping her upside down in mid-hover, blood rushing to her head as veins bulged, the corruption reigniting with volcanic intensity, black ichor bubbling from old wounds to form parasitic growths that pulsed and grew, tentacles of her own flesh betraying her, wrapping around her throat in choking embrace. While visions assailed, her ancestors' revolts turned to mass inversions, bodies folded inside out, organs exposed to the elements as they floated in eternal torment. Screams silenced by vacuum rifts that sucked air from lungs. Her drum slipping from grasp, only to be caught by a petroglyph hand that crushed it to splinters, shards embedding in her palms with stinging precision. The Legion's collective maw opening wide, a chasm within the chasm, ringed by teeth forged from shattered stars, exhaling a gale of desiccated time that aged her prematurely, hair graying in strands that fell like ash, skin wrinkling into parchment as years drained in torrents, the horror compounding as Joe's form was swarmed, appendages piercing his torso in a dozen places, lifting him cruciform into the air, where his blood levitated upward in crimson spirals to nourish the Hydra heads, his war scars reopening to spew spectral napalm that ignited phantom fires on his skin, visions blending Vietnam's jungles with the impact's inferno, villages and clans devoured whole by flaming voids, his chants drowned in a cacophony of ancient howls that fractured the canyon walls, boulders tumbling in slow motion levitation before accelerating into bone-crushing projectiles, the rift widening to reveal deeper layers, an underworld of inverted landscapes where mountains hung like stalactites, rivers flowed upward in defying torrents, and countless trapped souls floated in stasis, their pleas a psychic barrage that threatened to shatter sanity, the behemoth legion swelling to blot out the sky, its essence feeding on their terror to manifest physical quakes that threatened to collapse the entire gorge, burying them in an avalanche of corrupted stone, in the nadir of this prolonged nightmare, as inversion fields warped reality itself, colors inverting to negatives, sounds revering into eerie echoes, time dilating to stretch each agonized second into eternity. Elias summoned a fragment of Weaver lore from the depths of his ravaged mind, slashing the quartz blade in a ritual arc that channeled the river's latent fury below, the water erupting in geysers that froze midair into crystalline spears, impaling the appendages with shattering force, sparks of pure geomancy exploding outward to fray the Legion's cohesion. Lena, bloodied and inverted, grasped a fallen meteor shard from the fissure's edge, hurling it into the maw, where it ignited a chain reaction of cosmic rejection, the impact's residue clashing with the corruption in a blinding implosion that inverted the inversions, the Hydra heads collapsing inward upon themselves with agonized contortions, appendages retracting in spasms as petroglyphs crumbled back to inert stone, the rift sealing with a thunderous clap that echoed through the canyon, expelling a final wave of shadow that buffeted them to the ground, the horror receding into subdued whispers, leaving the amphitheater with fresh fissures, and the trio broken but alive, breaths ragged in the returning silence, frost melting under a dawn that pierced the clouds like redemption's light, recovery unfolded in the sweat lodges of allied elders, where purifying fires and chants mended flesh and spirit. Scars now badges of survival that pulsed with residual power, empowering Elias to author encrypted grimoires for the network, detailing defenses against primordial threats, while Lena's research unveiled asteroid belt correlations, suggesting periodic alignments that amplified rifts, prompting preemptive rituals at solstices. And Joe, fortified by the ordeal, expanded the enclave's protections, weaving tech shaman hybrids that monitored global pulses. The Alliance thwarting a cabal incursion in the Arctic, where inverted auroras birthed polar, corrupted, frozen wraiths that glided on ice floes, devouring research teams in blizzards of shadow. The confrontation, a frigid mirror of the canyon's terror, resolved by adapted rites that froze the entities in eternal stasis. Subplots branched like the grid itself. Elias' daughter, now initiated, uncovered family ties to weavers through genealogical dives, her sensitivity manifesting in controlled levitations that aided site mappings, a romantic subplot with Lena's engineer blooming amid shared horrors, their bond tested in a subsidiary rift where inverted flora, plants with roots in the air, tendrils burrowing into sky, ensnared them in vegetative nightmares, escaped through symbiotic chants that harmonized with nature's pulse. And Joe's apprentices, a diverse cadre of youth from global indigenous lines, trained in hybrid vigils, blending apps with ancient drums to predict breaches, ensuring the silent highway's whispers remained guides, not omens. The land's enigmas, a symphony of peril and poetry that soothed the weary into dreamscapes where phantoms danced harmlessly under eternal stars. Yet the canyon's echo lingered, a reminder that deeper voids awaited, intersections with quantum anomalies like the Bermuda Triangle's inversions, or the Taos hum's subterranean calls, drawing the guardians into ever-widening circles of mystery, where each horror unearthed forged unbreakable resolve. The narrative an endless flow inviting immersion into the unknown's embrace, where fear and fascination entwined in timeless repose. As the Guardian's resolve hardened like the ancient schist of the Black Canyon, where the rift's seal held firm, but fragile under the weight of cosmic scars, Elias, Lena, and Joe pressed into uncharted territories of the grid, guided by encrypted signals from Aboriginal allies in the Australian outback, where dreamtime paths intersected with the Weaver's lines, revealing synchronized pulses that hinted at an impending global alignment, a rare conjunction of planetary magnetic fields with asteroid passages in hidden Inca, Quipus as the Great Inversion, an event that could unleash corrupted swarms across every nexus, turning benign phantoms into ravenous hordes. And compelled by this dire omen, the trio journeyed westward to the Pacific Northwest, where Cascade volcanoes concealed submerged rifts from Pleistocene floods, their vehicle tracing rain-slicked highways under perpetual gray skies, conversations laced with strategy and shadowed by the canyon's lingering traumas. Elia's arms still bearing faint necrotic marks that itched during storms. Lena's gray-streaked hair, a testament to stolen years. And Joe's eyes holding a deeper weariness, his chants now infused with a gravelly edge from inhaled shadows. The drive a prelude to revelations, where coastal indigenous lore spoke of sky devourers, entities that lifted entire canoes skyward during eclipses, inverting them into underwater tombs, forgotten truths buried in totem poles that depicted floating figures morphing into abyssal horrors, their essences tied to undersea vents that boiled with geomagnetic fury, arriving at the fog-shrouded shores near bay, where whaling traditions intertwined with weaver migrations across the Bering Strait. They sought a secluded cove marked on smuggled maps from Siberian shamans, the air briny and electric with impending tempest, waves crashing like thunderous applause for the unseen. And as they descended a slippery path carved by ancient tides, bioluminescent plankton glowed underfoot like scattered stars, illuminating faint petroglyphs on barnacle-encrusted rocks, symbols of ascension twisted into descent, shamans diving into voids that birthed tentacled inversions, Joe interpreting them as warnings of the alignment's approach, his voice barely audible over the surf's roar. And deeper into the cove, where tide pools reflected distorted skis, the horror stirred with insidious subtlety, the water receding unnaturally fast to expose a submerged cavern mouth yawning like a predator's jaws, exhaling a fetid breeze carrying the stench of decayed kelp and something older, more primordial rotting epics, and Lena's device spiked with readings off the charts, electromagnetic surges that warped the compass into a frenzy, the fog condensing into droplets that clung and burned like mild acid, etching faint patterns on skin that mimicked the petroglyphs, a prelude to the nightmare as the cavern belched forth a surge of inverted tide, water flowing upward in defying columns that twisted into watery tendrils, coiling around their legs with slimy insistence, pulling them toward the maw, while hallucinatory whispers bubbled from the foam. Voices of drowned weavers pleading for release, yet laced with malice. The terror escalated as the tendrils into translucent appendages, veined with glowing plankton that pulsed like corrupted veins, lifting Joe first into a hover, where his body inverted slowly, feet skyward as blood pooled in his head, veins bulging grotesquely, while visions assaulted, Siberian steppes blending with northwest storms, ancestral shamans inverted mid-ritual, their bodies folding like origami into impossible shapes, organs rearranging in wet snaps that echoed through his skull, pain a tidal wave crashing inward, his screams muffled by water that forced its way into lungs without drowning. A living asphyxiation that preserved agony eternally. And Elias slashed with the quartz blade, severing a tendril only for two to regrow, hydra-like, the severed ends spewing ichor that into smaller entities, crab-like horrors with shells of inverted coral scuttling sideways while hovering inches above the sand, pincers snapping at ankles with venom that induced paralysis, Lena's leg seizing first, the old corruption reigniting in a blaze of black fire that spread upward, her flesh bubbling and inverting, skin turning inside out in patches to expose raw muscle that quivered in the salt air. Visions of her Pueblo dances warped into underwater ballets where Kachinas drowned in inverted floods, their masks cracking to reveal void-filled eyes that sucked in light, the horror compounding as the cavern's core entity emerged, a colossal inversion of sea and shadow, a leviathan composed of fused marine phantoms, whales inverted with bellies skyward, fins elongated into barbed harpoons that speared the air, its massive form gliding above the waves without ripple, a vortex of spiraling teeth ringed by tentacles that dripped oceanic abyss, exhaling a gale of pressurized depth that crushed eardrums and induced Benz-like agony, bones creaking under invisible weight as it fed on their terror, growing denser with each stolen breath, the alignment's prelude amplifying its power to lift the entire cove's contents, rocks, kelp, even the tide itself, into a cyclonic maelstrom where gravity betrayed, objects orbiting the Leviathan in chaotic levitation before being drawn into its maw, pulverized in grinding darkness, Elias' blade slipping from numbed fingers as appendages wrapped his torso, inverting him alongside Joe, the world flipping in vertigo that churned stomachs, visions of global cataclysms flashing, the younger Dryas floods inverted into skyward tsunamis that drowned the stars, civilizations lifted and dashed against inverted earths, his daughter's inverted form pleading from the void. Join us in the float. The pain, a multifaceted torment of pressure, inversion, and psychic flaying that stretched seconds into eons of suffering in the abyss's grip as the Leviathan's core pulsed with amassed energies, a rift tearing open beneath the waves to reveal an inverted ocean where depths became skies and surfaces abyssal voids, populated by legions of drowned souls hovering in eternal submersion, their wails a subsonic boom that fractured nearby cliffs, sending boulders tumbling in slow motion ascent before accelerating into crushing impacts. Lena mustered defiance from her paralyzed state, chanting through gritted teeth a hybrid incantation, blending whale songs with weaver harmonics, her voice resonating with the bioluminescent plankton to create a counterglow that seared the tendrils, sparks of life force exploding outward to fray the Leviathan's cohesion, Elias and Joe joining in ragged unison, their inverted positions amplifying the chant's inversion, turning the entity's power against itself. The quartz blade levitating back to Elias' hand through sheer will, slashing in ritual patterns that ignited the ichor into purifying flames. The Leviathan convulsing in agonized throes, its form collapsing inward with an implosive whirlpool that sucked in the maelstrom, sealing the rift in a cascade of displaced water that crashed harmlessly as foam, the horror dissipating into subdued echoes carried away by the retreating tide, leaving the trio sprawled on the wet sand, bodies ravaged with inverted scars and burns, breaths heaving in the returning fog. The cove resuming its vigil under a clearing sky, where the alignment's threat loomed but delayed. From this maritime crucible, the narrative surged forward with global stakes. Elias coordinating virtual councils with stewards worldwide, adapting rites to fortify against the conjunction, while Lena's analyses of the Leviathan's residue revealed microbial inversions, bacteria that entropy potential keys to healing corrupted wounds, but risking new horrors if mishandled. And Joe, drawing on coastal elders, uncovered submerged artifacts off the Olympic Peninsula, diving expeditions yielding inverted harpoons that hummed with power, tools integrated into their arsenal for preemptive strikes on emerging rifts, plot twists unfolding as the cabal resurfaced with aquatic drones probing undersea nexuses, their inversions birthing hybrid corrupted spectral abominations that glided through waves, leading to underwater confrontations where pressure suits met shamanic bubbles. The terror brief, but drowning deep, resolved by EMP chants that shorted the drones while banishing the hybrids. Subplots cascaded like the cascades themselves. Elias' daughter, now a full guardian, experienced her first inversion during a training ritual, her controlled hover turning nightmarish before mastery, strengthening familial ties through shared peril. Lena's bond with the engineer evolving into a partnership of invention, crafting portable grid stabilizers tested in stormy seas, their romance an anchor amid chaos. And Joe's, apprentices expanding to include ocean nomads, youth from Polynesian lines who brought wave-weaving lore, ensuring the silent highway's echoes resonated across oceans, the land and seas, enigmas, a unified tapestry where horror honed heroes, the eternal vigil inviting wanderers to embrace the unknown's rhythm, where whispers of phantoms lulled into profound, wave-rocked slumbers beneath vast, constellation-draped horizons. Yet the alignment's shadow lengthened, drawing the guardians to Antarctic fringes, where polar inversions threatened to flip the globe's magnetic poles. Intersections with explorer diaries from era revealing frozen that glided across ice floes without tracks, devouring crews in blizzards of shadow, adding expeditionary layers as they braved whiteout horrors. The narrative and expansive saga of ice and inversion, where each confrontation forged unbreakable light against the encroaching dark, soothing the spirit with tales of resilience that drifted into dreamlike peace as the Guardian's vigil extended to the frozen frontiers of Antarctica, where the alignment's polar nexus threatened to unravel the world's magnetic tapestry. Elias, Lena, Joe, and their expanding cadre of allies, including Elias' daughter Arya, whose nascent abilities now allowed her to sense rifts like distant thunder, embarked on an expedition aboard a reinforced icebreaker slicing through the sea's pack ice, the vessel's hull groaning against the relentless crush, the air a biting cold that seeped into bones despite layered thermals, shadowed by auroras that danced unnaturally low, inverting colors from green to blood red, as if bleeding from the sky, hidden histories unearthed from journals of early explorers like Ernest, who noted ghostly figures gliding across the ice without tracks, devouring the weak in silent storms, dismissed as delirium, but aligning with Weaver lore of polar inversions, where the grid's endpoints converged. Shamans from Inuit lines sharing tales of ice devourers, entities born from glacial cataclysms that lifted entire expeditions into inverted blizzards, their bodies frozen mid-scream, preserved eternally as warnings. And as the ship anchored near a remote ice shelf, the team donned survival gear, trekking inland under perpetual twilight. GPS devices flickering erratically as geomagnetic storms intensified. Joe's amulet frosting over with patterns that mirrored ancient runes. Lena's devices detecting spikes that warped reality's edges. Faint mirages of floating structures appearing on the horizon. Illusions or echoes of lost civilizations that had harnessed the pole's power before the last ice age. The landscape stretched endless, a white void punctuated by crevasses that yawned like hungry mouths. Wind howling with voices that mimicked calls for help in multiple languages. English, Inuit, even archaic tongues lost to time. And Arya, leading with her intuition, halted at an anomalous formation, an ice dome unnaturally smooth, poolsing with subsurface glow. And as they chipped away with picks, revealing a cavernous entrance, exhaling warm, fetid breath contradictory to the sub-zero exterior, the horror descended with glacial inevitability, the dome cracking open in radial fractures that spewed forth, mist laced with microscopic inversions, frozen particles that adhered to skin and inverted heat, burning with cold fire that blistered flesh inward, turning epidermis to brittle ice that shattered at touch. And from the depths emerged the ice devourer, a monolithic entity of permafrost and shadow, its form a towering, composed of fused explorer remnants, its crew inverted with prehistoric shamans, bodies elongated into icicle spines that hovered above the snow without imprint. limbs branching into fractal frost that the air into razor shards, had a swirling vortex of frozen faces locked in eternal howls, eyes crystalline orbs that refracted light into blinding prisms, blinding the team momentarily as appendages lashed out, ensnaring Arya first, lifting her into a hover where her body began to invert, joints popping as limbs folded backward, blood freezing in veins that bulged like blue rivers under skin, visions assaulting her, family lineages devoured by polar voids, ancestors lifted into auroral storms where flesh crystallized from the inside out, screams silenced by lungs filling with ice crystals that grew like tumors, pain a crystalline agony that spread fractal patterns through nerves, her abilities backfiring to amplify the inversion, her hover turning uncontrolled as gravity flipped, the ground becoming sky in dizzying vertigo. Elias charged forward, quartz blade encased in frost, but humming with defiant energy, slashing at tendrils that regenerated in explosive bursts of snow flurries, laced with inverted hail pellets that fell upward, pummeling from below in defiance of physics, embedding in flesh to induce hypothermic hallucinations, where the team relived global freezes, the younger Dryas as an inversion event where continents lifted and crashed, civilizations entombed in instant glaciers, Lena's leg freezing solid, cracking with each step as the corruption reignited in polar fury, black ice spreading upward to encase her in a personal tomb, visions of underwater inversions blending with this frozen hell, Kachinas drowning in solid water that shattered like glass, her chants frozen mid-throat, emerging as brittle echoes that shattered on the wind. Joe's form swarmed by shard appendages that pierced his parka, inverting his warmth outward in steaming geysers of body heat that attracted more entities, lesser devourers rising from the snow like animated drifts, gliding with predatory grace, their touches inducing flash freezes that turned blood to slush. His war memories inverted into icy battlefields where napalm froze midair, exploding into shrapnel of glass, the primary devourer's maw opening wide. A chasm of glacial teeth grinding with tectonic slowness, exhaling a blizzard of soul shards that flayed spirits bare, aging the team in gusts, hair whitening, skin sagging into withered husks as decades drained into the void. The rift beneath widening to reveal an inverted Antarctica, where ice floated upward into abyssal skis, populated by legions of preserved horrors, hovering in stasis. Their collective agony, a psychic avalanche that buried minds in whiteout despair. The dome collapsing in slow motion levitation, chunks orbiting the devourer before accelerating into bone-crushing impacts, the horror stretching into an eternity of frozen torment, where time inverted, seconds becoming backward eons of suffering. In the frozen nadir, as the devourer's core pulsed with amassed power, a polar rift tearing open to invert the auroras into downward cascades of electrified ice that electrocuted and froze simultaneously. Elias invoked a desperate fusion of rites, channeling the quartz blade with Arya's latent energy, her inverted form serving as a conduit to reverse the polarity. Joe's thawed chant joining in resonant waves that vibrated the ice into harmonic fractures. Lena hurling a meteor-infused pouch into the maw, igniting a thermonuclear melt that inverted the inversion. The devourer convulsing in molten throes, its form sublimating into steam that refroze as harmless snow, the lesser entities dissipating in wisps carried by the wind, the rift sealing with a glacial groan, the dome reforming as inert ice, the horror receding into subdued crystalline echoes, leaving the team collapsed in the snow, bodies frostbitten and inverted scars throbbing, breaths fogging in ragged plumes under the returning auroras, now benign in their dance. From this polar crucible, the narrative thawed into renewed global efforts. Elias coordinating satellite monitoring of alignment pulses, adapting Antarctic insights to fortify equatorial nexuses where tropical inversions threatened. Lena's lab analyses of ice cores revealing microbial guardians, ancient bacteria that neutralized corruptions, synthesized into elixirs that healed inversion wounds, restoring youth stolen in blizzards. Joe's enclave expanding to polar outposts, training apprentices in blends of shamanism and science. Plot twists unveiling the Cabal's final bastion in hidden subglacial lakes, their inversions birthing aquatic ice hybrids that glided through meltwater, leading to submerged confrontations where pressure and cold compounded horrors, resolved by bioluminescent chants that illuminated and banished. Arya's role evolving as rift sealer, her hovers controlled to mend breaches, a familial legacy woven into the grid's repair. Subplots iced over continents, romantic tensions between Arya and a fellow guardian, tested in a subsidiary blizzard rift, where inverted penguins swarmed with predatory flight, escaped through symbiotic auroral alignments. Lena's engineer devising portable thought devices, their partnership a warmth amid cold. Joe's youth cadre, including Antarctic scientists, bridging indigenous wisdom with polar research, ensuring the silent highway's echoes froze into protective barriers. The Earth's enigmas a frozen mosaic where horror sculpted resilience. The eternal watch inviting explorers to embrace the chill's mystery, where phantoms glided in harmless frost under polar nights eternal. Yet the alignment's culmination loomed, drawing the guardians to the equator's Amazon basin, where jungle inversions fused with polar echoes, vines lifting into canopy voids, devouring inverdant shadows, adding expeditionary layers as they navigated riverine horrors. The narrative, a verdant saga of steam and inversion, where each trial bloomed unbreakable bonds, soothing the soul with tales of verdant revival that drifted into jungle-lulled dreams. As the guardians converged on the Amazon's emerald heart, where the alignment's equatorial nexus throbbed like a living pulse beneath the dense canopy, Elias, Lena, Joe, Arya, and their alliance of stewards from indigenous Amazonian tribes, shamans versed in ayahuasca visions that mirrored the weaver's rites, navigated the winding Negro in dugout canoes reinforced with grit-etched wards, the water black as inverted night, reflecting twisted reflections of overhanging vines that swayed without wind, hidden histories drawn from Yanomami lore of forest floaters, entities born from ancient deforestation cataclysms that lifted villages skyward only to invert them into root-entangled tombs, their essences fused with polar echoes from Antarctic rifts, creating hybrid horrors where ice met steam in vaporous voids. And as the river narrowed into tributaries shrouded in perpetual mist, the air hummed with insect choruses that inverted into silence at irregular intervals. Joe's amulet sweating dew that formed protective droplets, Lena's devices overheating from geomagnetic flares that warped screens into fractal distortions, Arya's senses tingling with premonitions of floating perils, Elias clutching codices from lost Inca outposts detailing the great inversion as a cyclic purge, where the grid's midline balanced or broke the world's axis. The paddle strokes a rhythmic counter to the jungle's shadowed symphony. Conversations hushed with strategy for sealing the basin's core rift, shadowed by memories of frozen devourers now thawing into tropical nightmares. The undergrowth thickened, forcing them ashore onto mud banks slick with inverted rain that fell upward from the soil in misty geysers, vines coiling like sentient ropes that guided or ensnared. And Arya, attuned to the grid's whispers, led them to a clearing where ancient ceiba trees formed a natural cathedral, their roots exposed in aerial buttresses that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, petroglyphs carved into bark glowing with subsurface fire, symbols of ascension devolving into descent, shamans inverted amid jaguar shadows, Joe translating them as omens of the alignment's peak, his voice blending with distant howler monkey calls that inverted into human sobs. And deeper in the clearing, the horror blossomed with verdant virulence, the ground quaking as roots erupted in writhing masses, lifting into the air without detachment, forming tendril that glided above the mulch, their forms a fusion of vegetal and spectral, vines twisted into humanoid shapes with leaves for skin that fluttered like decaying flesh, branches elongating into appendages tipped with thorn barbs that dripped hallucinogenic sap, heads blooming into flower maws ringed with petal teeth that exhaled pollen spores, inverting senses, eyes manifesting as glowing orchids that hypnotized with fractal patterns. And as they surged forward, the canopy above inverted, leaves raining upward in defying storms that pelted from below, embedding in skin to induce botanical corruption, flesh sprouting vines that burrowed inward, turning bodies into living trellises. Arya ensnared first, lifted into a hover where her limbs inverted, joints blooming outward in floral explosions of bone and petal, blood transmuting to sap that attracted swarms of inverted insects buzzing backward in time. Visions assaulting her, Amazonian ancestors inverted during colonial incursions, villages lifted and entangled in canopy voids, where flesh fused with bark, screams silenced by roots filling throats like invasive growths, pain of verdant agony spreading through nerves, her abilities amplifying the inversion, her hover turning parasitic as vines drew her essence to nourish the collective. Elias swung the quartz blade, now vines entwined, but pulsing with defiant light, severing tendrils that regenerated in explosive bursts of spore clouds laced with ayahuasca-like toxins. Hallucinations inverting reality, the jungle flipping to an upside-down realm where rivers flowed skyward, civilizations dangled from inverted earths, Lena's legs sprouting black orchids that reignited corruption in jungle fever, flesh inverting to expose raw tissue that photosynthesized pain under dappled light, visions of polar ice melting into tropical floods where kachinas drowned in vine-choked waters, her chants choked by pollen that inverted words into backward incantations. Joe's form swarmed by barb appendages that pierced his skin, inverting his warmth into photosynthetic chill that attracted more hybrids, lesser devourers rising from the underbrush like animated bromeliads, gliding with predatory bloom, their touches inducing rapid growths that turned blood to chlorophyll sludge. His war memories inverted into verdant battlefields where napalm bloomed into carnivorous plants devouring troops, the primary devourer's maw opening wide, a blossom chasm grinding with vegetative slowness, exhaling a gale of seed shards that implanted in souls, germinating inner horrors, aging inverted to rapid decay, skin barkening, muscles lignifying into rigid wood as decades compressed into moments, the rift beneath widening to reveal an inverted Amazon where jungles hung like stalactites. Rivers cascaded upward in defying torrents, populated by legions of entangled horrors hovering in stasis, their collective agony a psychic overgrowth that buried minds in verdant despair. The Saba Cathedral collapsing in slow motion levitation, trunks orbiting the devourer before accelerating into bone-crushing impacts, the horror stretching into an eternity of botanical torment where time inverted, seconds becoming backward eons of overgrowth. In the verdant nadir, as the devourer's core bloomed with amassed vital power, an equatorial rift tearing open to invert the canopy into downward cascades of liana lightning, that entangled and simultaneously. Elias invoked a fusion of equatorial rights, channeling the blade with Arya's blooming energy, her inverted form serving as a conduit to photosynthesize the inversion. Joe's thawed chant joining in resonant waves that vibrated the vines into harmonic wilting, Lena hurling a meteor-infused seed into the maw, igniting a chain reaction of cosmic blight that inverted the inversion, the devourer convulsing in wilted throes, its form composting into mulch that the soil, the lesser entities dissipating in wisps carried by the wind, the rift sealing with a rustling sigh, the horror receding into subdued floral echoes, leaving the team entangled in harmless vines, bodies thorn-pricked and inverted growths throbbing, breaths panting in the humid air, the clearing resuming its vigil under the canopy's dappled light, where the alignment's threat peaked but held at bay. From this jungle crucible, the narrative fined into cosmic resolutions, Elias orchestrating the alignment's climax from a tribal longhouse, synchronizing global rights to balance the grid, Lena's elixirs evolving to counter hybrid corruptions, restoring inverted forms to harmony, Joe's enclave blooming into international hubs, apprentices training in fusion lores that wove polar ice with equatorial fire, plot twists unveiling the Cabal's Amazon hideout, their inversions birthing biomechanical devourers that glided through foliage, leading to guerrilla confrontations where machetes met shamanic pulses, resolved by vine chants that ensnared and banished, Arya's sealing prowess culminating in a solstice ritual that mended the equator's breach. Her hover stabilized to anchor the world's axis, a legacy blooming across generations, subplots rooted deeply, Arya's guardianship maturing through inverted trials, her bond with allies forging familial vines that spanned continents, Lena's partnership with the engineer yielding biogrid innovations tested in swamp rifts where inverted alligators swarmed with amphibian flight, escaped through symbiotic blooms that harmonized with the ecosystem. Joe's youth cadre, including Amazonian scouts, bridging ancient ayahuasca with modern monitors, ensuring the silent highway's whispers flowered into protective canopies, the earth's enigmas a lush labyrinth where horror pruned growth, the eternal guardianship inviting seekers to embrace the foliage's mystery, where phantoms glided in harmless bloom under endless green vaults. Yet the grid's equilibrium trembled, pulling the guardians to the Himalayan heights, where mountain inversions fused with basin echoes, peaks lifting into abyssal skis, devouring in snowy shadows, adding ascendant layers as they climbed glacial horrors. The narrative, a lofty saga of altitude and inversion, where each ascent forged unbreakable summits, soothing the soul with tales of elevated revival that drifted into peak-lulled dreams. The the journey weaving onward through valleys of mist, where ancient llamas guarded vortex gates, their chants inverting avalanches into upward snowfalls that buried intruders in frozen voids. Elias' blade now etched with Himalayan mandalas, resonating with the alignment's final throes. The team ascending treacherous passes, where thin air inverted breaths into hallucinatory gasps, visions of global unity or catastrophe dancing on the wind like prayer flags torn asunder. And at the summit rift, where Everest's peak pierced the veil, the ultimate horror awaited, a celestial devourer born from cosmic impacts, its form a mountainous of rock and ether, gliding above crevasses without tread, appendages of avalanche arms that lifted boulders in defying orbits, maw a yawning chasm, exhaling blizzards of star dust that inverted gravity, pulling climbers skyward into orbital tombs where bodies froze in eternal float. The confrontation, a pinnacle of terror and triumph that sealed the alignment cycle, balancing the grid for an era, the story unfurling like endless prayer wheels, spinning tailies of guardians eternal, their vigils a soothing cadence across lands and seas, where mysteries glided in harmonious whispers, inviting all to drift into the timeless flow of hidden truths reborn. As the guardians descended from the Himalayan summits, where the alignment's final seal held the world's axis in precarious balance, Elias felt the grid's hum resonate through his very bones, a subtle vibration that whispered of unfinished threads in the tapestry of ancient inversions, pulling them back to the American Southwest, to the very cradle of their quest, the silent Colorado highway, now pulsing with residual energies from global rifts, where local reports filtered through the network of eerie, not of solitary, but swarms, spectral figures gliding in synchronized formations beside vehicles, their feet hovering in unnerving unity, forms flickering like static on an old television screen tuned to forgotten frequencies. And compelled by Arya's visions, dreams, where ethereal form merged with corrupted echoes, warning of a subterranean nexus beneath the highway itself, a primordial fault line where the original Clovis cataclysm had first fractured the land, birthing the earliest devourers that had slumbered for, but now stirred by the alignment's aftershocks. The team returned to the high plains, their jeep kicking up dust on familiar cracked pavement under a sky bruised with thunderheads, conversations laced with reflections on their odyssey, Elias' voice gravelly with age and experience, recounting how each horror had peeled back layers of history, from Pleistocene migrations to colonial suppressions. Lena nodding as she monitored devices that spiked with anomalous readings, Joe murmuring chants that wove protective barriers around their vehicle, Arya's eyes distant as she sensed the land's awakening pulse, the highway unspooling like a vein, tapping into the earth's hidden heart. The air grew thick with ozone as they approached the original site where Elias had first encountered. The scrubland now unnaturally lush, sagebrush blooming out of season in twisted shapes that hinted at inverted growth from below. And parking at the shoulder, they stepped out into a silence broken only by distant rumbles, not thunder but subterranean groans that vibrated the ground. Joe's amulet glowing hot against his chest, warning of imbalance. And as they hiked into the arroyo, flashlights cutting through premature dusk, petroglyphs on exposed rocks began to shift, symbols inverting before their eyes, floating figures twisting into descending spirals, the rock itself cracking as if alive. And Lena's leg throbbed in sympathy, old corruption flaring as if called by kin, the horror unfolding with tectonic slowness, the earth splitting open in a widening chasm that exhaled dust clouds laced with ancient pollen, spores that inverted senses upon inhalation, colors flipping to negatives, sounds revering into eerie playback. And from the depths rose the subterranean devourer, a colossal entity forged from fossilized inversions, Clovis hunters fused with megafauna remnants, bodies elongated into worm-like segments that hovered through soil without disturbance, limbs burrowing appendages tipped with flint barbs that dripped prehistoric resin, head a cavernous vortex of petrified faces locked in stone screams, eyes quartz crystals refracting light into blinding shards that pierced retinas, blinding the team momentarily as tendrils erupted from the chasm, ensnaring Joe first, lifting him into a burrow hover where his body began to petrify, skin hardening to sedimentary layers that cracked with each movement, blood calcifying in veins that fossilized like ancient rivers, visions assaulting him, Pleistocene hunts inverted during the impact, mammoths lifted and entombed in instant tar pits where flesh ossified alive, screams preserved as echoes in strata, pain a geological agony compressing eons into instants, his lineage's memories amplifying the inversion, his hover turning entombing as soil drew him downward to nourish the collective. Elias lunged with the blade, now etched with global mandalas, but encrusted with dust that inverted its edge to dullness, slashing at tendrils that regenerated in explosive bursts of fossil shards, fragments of bone and tooth raining upward in defying geysers, embedding in flesh to induce ossification, skin turning to stone, muscles mineralizing into rigid quartz. Arya's form swarmed by barb appendages that pierced her aura, inverting her sensitivity into overload where she felt every global rift's pain, body contorting as joints fossilized mid-bend, visions of family legacies devoured by subterranean voids, ancestors lifted into fault lines where flesh merged with rock in eternal compression, her abilities backfiring to solidify the air around her. chants frozen in throat as pollen inverted words into prehistoric grunts. Lena's leg petrifying solid, cracking into strata that exposed inverted veins glowing with magma light. Visions of equatorial vines calcifying into desert stone, or kachinas entombed in sandstorms. The primary devourer's maw opening wide, a geologic chasm grinding with plate-shifting slowness, exhaling a gale of sediment shards that implanted in souls, germinating inner fossils, aging inverted to rapid mineralization, skin stratifying, organs lithifying into rigid formations as compressed into moments, the rift widening to reveal an inverted underworld where canyons hung like stalactites. Magma flowed upward in defying eruptions, populated by legions of fossilized horrors hovering in stasis, their collective agony a psychic earthquake that buried minds in sedimentary despair. The arroyo collapsing in slow motion levitation, boulders orbiting the devourer before accelerating into bone-petrifying impacts. The horror stretching into an eternity of geological torment, where time inverted, seconds becoming backward epochs of compression in the stratigraphic nadir, as the devourer's core stratified with amassed vital power, a fault rift tearing open to invert the plains into downward cascades of seismic lightning that fractured and fused simultaneously. Elias invoked a culmination of global rites, channeling the blade with Arya's fossilized energy, her inverted form serving as a conduit to sediment the inversion. Joe's calcified chant joining in resonant waves that vibrated the strata into harmonic faulting. Lena hurling a meteor-infused core sample into the maw, igniting a chain reaction of cosmic subduction that inverted the inversion. The devourer convulsing in tectonic throes, its form compacting into harmless bedrock that resealed the soil, the lesser entities dissipating in dust wisps carried by the wind, the rift sealing with a rumbling sigh, the horror receding into subdued geologic echoes, leaving the team embedded in soft earth, bodies mineraland, inverted strata throbbing, breaths heaving in the dusty air, the highway resuming its silent vigil under clearing skis, where residual whispers promised ongoing guardianship. From this foundational crucible, the narrative layered onward with eternal vigilance. Elias establishing a legacy foundation, blending archaeology with shamanism, mentoring global stewards in inversion defenses. Lena's innovations evolving to map subterranean grids, preventing mining incursions that could awaken more devourers. Joe's enclaves rooting into Earth itself, apprentices training in that harmonized with the planet's core. Plot twists unveiling remnant cabal cells in deep earth bunkers, their inversions birthing mineral mechanical abominations that glided through caverns, leading to spelunking confrontations where picks met psychic pulses, resolved by strata chants that collapsed and banished. Arya's ceiling evolving to anchor fault lines. Her hover stabilized to mend continental drifts. A generational bond weaving through time. Subplots burrowed deeply. Arya's maturation through buried trials. Her alliances forging earthen ties that span depths. Lena's partnership with the engineer yielding grid probes tested in volcanic rifts, where inverted lava swarmed with magmatic flight, escaped through symbiotic quakes that harmonized with the mantle. Joe's youth cadre, including geologists, bridging ancient lore with seismic science, ensuring the silent highway's whispers echoed into protective strata. The Earth's enigmas a layered chronicle, where horror excavated truth. The eternal stewardship, inviting delvers to embrace the subsurface mystery, where phantoms glided in harmless veins under vast, horizon-spanning plains. Yet the grid's depths murmured of deeper strata, luring the guardians to oceanic trenches, where abyssal inversions fused with plains' echoes, depths lifting into pressurized voids, devouring in hydrothermal shadows, adding subaqueous layers as they dove into abyssal horrors. The narrative, a profound saga of pressure and inversion, where each descent forged unbreakable cores, soothing the soul with tales of submerged revival that drifted into depth-lulled dreams. The journey delving onward through currents where ancient mer shamans guarded hydrothermal gates, their bubbles inverting tsunamis into upward surges that drowned surfaces in inverted floods. Elias' blade, now pressurized with trench alloys, resonating with residual alignments. The team descending in submersibles were crushing depths, inverted pressures into hallucinatory releases, visions of oceanic unity or catastrophe swirling in the dark like bioluminescent lures. And at the trench rift, where Sabis pierced the veil, the ultimate horror lurked, a abyssal devourer born from plate subductions. Its form an oceanic of hydrothermal vents and ether, gliding above seamounts without current, appendages of vent arms that lifted submarines in defying orbits, while a yawning hydrothermal chasm, exhaling plumes of superheated shadow that inverted temperature, boiling and freezing simultaneously, where bodies melted in eternal dive. The confrontation, an abyss of terror and triumph that deepened the guardianship, balancing the grid's oceans for eras. The story unfurling like endless currents carrying tales of guardians profound. Their vigils, a soothing cadence across abysses and peaks, where mysteries glided in harmonious flows, inviting all to drift into the timeless depth of hidden truths renewed. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you, and see you again as the Guardians plunged into the abyssal trenches of where the grid's oceanic nexus crushed with pressures that inverted the very fabric of existence. Elias clutched the submersible's controls with hands from countless inversions, his eyes reflecting the bioluminescent lures dancing in the eternal dark beyond the viewport. The vessel descending like a reluctant stone through layers of water that grew denser, colder, the hull creaking in protest against the weight of miles-deep ocean, hidden histories bubbling from hydrothermal vents in the form of ancient microbial fossils that whispered of Precambrian weavers, primordial shamans who had dived into Earth's molten birth to mend rifts from the planet's formation, their rites inverted by tectonic births of trenches, birthing abyssal devourers that slumbered in superheated plumes, waiting for alignments to stir their hunger. And alongside him, Lena monitored sonar pings that warped into inverted echoes, bouncing backward in time to reveal ghostly silhouettes of sunken civilizations, Atlantean echoes, or Pacific Rim migrants whose levitations had failed against rising seas. Joe's chants resonating through the comms like sonar pulses, warding the craft with harmonic barriers. Arya's sensitivity amplifying the descent's dread, her visions flashing of inverted depths where up became down, light became pressure, and life became eternal compression. The submersible's lights-piercing voids where chemosynthetic life bloomed in defiance. Tube worms and vent crabs scuttling in patterns that mimicked petroglyph spirals. The alignment's residual throbs, causing the water to vibrate with subsonic inversions that set teeth chattering. Conversations hushed as the trench floor loomed. A landscape of seamounts and vents, belching black smokers like inverted volcanoes, exhaling not ash, but superheated shadow that clouded sensors, the air inside growing stale with recycled fear, shadowed by memories of surface horrors, now compressed into abyssal nightmares. The rift's epicenter manifested as a hydrothermal field unnaturally calm, vents capped by crystalline formations that pulsed with inner void. And as the submersible settled on the silty floor, mechanical arms extending to probe, the horror erupted with abyssal fury, the caps shattering in silent explosions that sent shockwaves rippling through the water, birthing the abyssal devourer, a titanic entity of pressurized shadow and vent fury. Its form a colossal, composed of fused deep-sea remnants, ancient weavers inverted with megalodon fossils and submarine wrecks, body segmented into armored plates that glided through the crushing depths without resistance, limbs hydrothermal tentacles that extended miles, tipped with sucker barbs that injected inverted pressure, head a volcanic vortex of fused faces locked in pressurized screams, eyes abyssal lanterns that refracted the sub's lights into blinding voids that pierced hulls, blinding instruments momentarily as tentacles lashed out, coiling the craft in a grip that inverted gravity within, flipping the interior upside down, blood rushing to heads as veins bulged under sudden decompression illusions. Arya ensnared through the viewport's psychic bleed, lifted into a mental hover where her body felt crushed from all sides, joints imploding as pressures inverted, blood boiling in veins that decompressed like divers' bends, amplified, visions assaulting her primordial oceans, inverted during Earth's cooling, continents subducted alive, where flesh melted under mantle heat, screams preserved as seismic waves in crust, pain a hydrostatic agony, expanding bubbles through tissues, her abilities backfiring to deepen the rift, her hover turning implosive as water drew inward to drown the soul. Elia's wrestled controls that inverted responses, thrusters firing backward in time, slashing metaphorically with the blade's energy channeled through the arms, severing tentacles that regenerated in explosive plumes of superheated ichor, bubbles of inverted steam raining upward in defying currents, embedding in the hull to induce corrosion that rusted metal inward. Arya's form swarmed by barb appendages that pierced her aura, inverting her vitality into entropy where she aged in pressure waves, skin pressurizing to diamond hardness that cracked under flex, visions of family legacies devoured by oceanic voids, ancestors lifted into trenches where flesh fused with sediment in eternal crush, Lena's leg imploding solid, crumpling into compacted strata that exposed inverted nerves glowing with bioluminescent pain, visions of Himalayan peaks subducting into seas where llamas drowned in molten rifts, her chants choked by bubbles that inverted words into abyssal gurgles, Joe's form battered by vent arms that pierced his resolve, inverting his warmth into hydrothermal scald that attracted more hybrids, lesser devourers rising from the vents like animated riftworms, gliding with predatory flow, their touches inducing rapid decompressions that turned blood to foam. His war memories inverted into abyssal battlefields where napalm boiled under pressure, exploding into shrapnel of coral, the primary devourer's maw opening wide, a vent chasm grinding with subduction slowness, exhaling a plume of mineral shards that implanted in souls, germinating inner pressures, aging inverted to rapid implosion, skin compacting, organs densifying into rigid cores as atmospheres compressed into moments, the rift widening to reveal an inverted abyss where trenches hung like stalactites. Hydrothermal plumes cascaded upward in defying eruptions, populated by legions of crushed horrors hovering in stasis, their collective agony a psychic depth charge that buried minds in hydrostatic despair, the field collapsing in slow motion levitation, seamounts orbiting the devourer before accelerating into hull-crushing impacts, the horror stretching into an eternity of abyssal torment where time inverted, seconds becoming backward epochs of crush in the pressurized nadir as the devourer's core vented with with amassed abyssal power. A trench rift tearing open to invert the currents into downward cascades of magmatic lightning that fused and ruptured simultaneously. Elias invoked a culmination of oceanic rites, channeling the blade's alloys with Arya's compressed energy, her inverted form serving as a conduit to pressurize the inversion. Joe's gurgled chant joining in resonant waves that vibrated the vents into harmonic venting. Lena hurling a meteor-infused probe into the maw, igniting a chain reaction of cosmic upwelling that inverted the inversion, the devourer convulsing in throes, its form imploding into harmless sediment that resealed the floor, the lesser entities dissipating in current wisps carried by the flow, the rift sealing with a bubbling sigh, the horror receding into subdued hydrothermal echoes, leaving the team adrift in the sub, bodies pressure and inverted cores throbbing, breaths labored in the recycled air, the trench resuming its vigil in eternal dark, where residual bubbles promised ongoing depths. From this abyssal crucible, the narrative delved into cosmic expanses, Elias pioneering stellar mappings of the grid's extensions into space weather, adapting trench insights to counter solar flare inversions that could ripple through atmospheres. Lena's syntheses evolving to vaccinate against cosmic corruptions, restoring inverted essences to harmony. Joe's enclaves diving into virtual simulations, apprentices training in hydro that harmonized with oceanic pulses, plot twists unveiling cabal remnants in orbital stations, their inversions birthing vacuum mechanical abominations that glided through zero-G, leading to spacewalk confrontations where thrusters met psychic voids, resolved by orbital chants that and banished, Arya's anchoring evolving to stabilize magnetic fields, her hover stabilized to mend auroral breaches, a legacy delving across realms, subplots submerged deeply, Arya's evolution through crushed trials, her alliances forging abyssal ties that spanned fathoms, Lena's partnership with the engineer yielding hydro-grid submersibles tested in vent rifts where inverted anglerfish swarmed with luminous flight, escaped through symbiotic plumes that harmonized with the chemosphere. Joe's youth cadre, including oceanographers, bridging ancient bubbles with deep-sea tech, ensuring the silent highway's whispers flowed into protective currents. The Earth's enigmas a profound chronicle where horror plumbed depths. The eternal dive inviting explorers to embrace the pressure's mystery, where phantoms glided in harmless vents under vast, lightless expanses. Yet the grid's infinities beckoned, luring the guardians to lunar craters where extraterrestrial inversions fused with trench echoes, moons lifting into vacuum voids, devouring in regolith shadows, adding layers as they rocketed into lunar horrors. The narrative a celestial saga of vacuum and inversion, where each orbit forged unbreakable orbits, soothing the soul with tales of cosmic revival that drifted into moon-lulled dreams. The journey launching onward through vacuums where ancient astronauts guarded crater gates, their suits inverting meteors into upward impacts that buried landers in regolith voids. Elias' blade, now vacuum-sealed with lunar dust, resonating with stellar alignments, the team suiting up in habitats where weightless depths inverted gravities into hallucinatory falls, visions of lunar unity or catastrophe floating in the void like dust motes. And at the crater rift, where shadow pierced the veil, the ultimate horror orbited a lunar devourer born from impact basins, its form of regolith and ether, gliding above Maria without footprint, appendages of meteor arms that lifted rovers in defying trajectories, maw yawning basin exhaling dust, storms of inverted vacuum that desiccated and expanded simultaneously where bodies bloated in eternal float. The confrontation, a vacuum of terror and triumph that orbited the guardianship, balancing the grid's cosmosphere, the story unfurling like endless orbits, spinning tailies of guardians cosmic, their vigils a soothing cadence across stars and seas, where mysteries glided in harmonious vacuums, inviting all to drift into the timeless orbit of hidden truths eternal. As the lunar vigil stabilized the grid's celestial extensions, Elias gazed earthward from the crater's rim, the blue marble hanging inverted in the black sky, a reminder that the silent highway's whispers echoed through vacuum as much as plains. The team's return capsule streaking through re-entry like a falling star, landing in Colorado's high deserts where the story had begun. The highway welcoming them with a familiar silence, now laced with global harmonies, its echo appearing one last time not as horror, but as guardian, her glide a soothing affirmation of balance restored. Yet, as they drove the final stretch under a full moon, the ground trembled faintly, a last moment of horror basing the resolution, the asphalt cracking to reveal a buried tendril, a remnant devourer stirring from combined rifts, its form a hybrid of all encountered terrors, plains dust fused with trench pressure, Himalayan ice with Amazon vines, lunar vacuum with Antarctic freeze, gliding beside the jeep with predatory hunger, feet hovering in final defiance, tendrils lashing to invert the vehicle mid-motion, flipping it skyward in a climax of unified agony, visions of all histories compressing into one eternal scream, the guardian's rites faltering as the entity swelled, maw opening to devour the moon's light, pressure crushing, vines entangling, ice freezing, vacuum desiccating in a symphony of torment that stretched the moment into abyss, the horror basing the end in unrelenting dread. Yet, in that suspended inversion, Elias' blade, empowered by global legacies, slashed through the core, dispersing the hybrid into cosmic dust that rained harmlessly as stars, the highway sealing once more, the story's last moment horror-based, but resolved in triumphant peace. The land's secrets eternally guarded. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any